When a man dabbles in the occult, he unknowingly unleashes a malevolent darkness he can't control. Night after night, he is tormented by the tentacles of terror. Unable to keep himself or his family safe, he consults the help of a white witch as he struggles to break the chains that bind him. Will he be freed or continue to be besieged by the hands of hell? This is the untold story of the demonic haunting of the house on Church Street in Michigan, also known as the Randy Irvin case. It's been a while since I've delved into a haunting as terrifying as this one, so with due caution, I wouldn't recommend watching this at night or alone. Standish, Michigan, originally named Granton, is a rural town near Lake Huron. Long before the hustle and bustle of the modern world, Native Americans used to call its land home, living, hunting, and dying upon its grounds. Their descendants in the modern day, like their ancestors, still very much believe in the power of the spiritual realm, and with their profound sense of respect for it, also comes a deep respect of the dead, and a belief further that disturbing their resting place can bring forth horrible things. Perhaps their beliefs are true. Our story begins in 1974 in Standish. A then 22-year-old man named Randy Irvin has lived in the area his entire life. After graduating high school, he decided that college wasn't the right path for him. In fact, he didn't know what that path was. As many young people often do, Randy was soul-searching, surfing couches, working random jobs for a few bucks in his pocket, and not really pursuing a career, but rather trying to pursue just who he was and who he wanted to be. That would change, however, when one day Randy landed a job at the United States Postal Service. With a good income, instead of sleeping at friends' homes, Randy sought a home of his own. Lucky for him, his father, Roy, bought properties and fixed them up, and either sold or rented them. He had recently acquired an old fixer-upper not too far from where Randy was working, and if he assists him with the renovations, he'll allow him to live there. Randy agrees and soon heads to work for his dad. For weeks, Randy works mornings, and right after work heads to the house to work well into the night alongside his father. One chilly afternoon, as father and son are digging up the basement floor, they would uncover something very unexpected. As one of their shovels dug into the earth, it hit something solid. Pulling it back and shoving the dirt off to the side, the two are astonished by what they see. They pull forth from the soil what appears to be a human femur bone. Struck by this unnerving discovery, and as if Pandora's box had been opened, the questions onto how and why someone would be buried underneath their home began to be speculated on at a furious pace. The home itself was over 100 years old. Was it a deliberate death, an accident, or something else? The story of what took place was perhaps lost in the sands of time. However, more bones would be discovered by the pair throughout the night. The following morning, Randy's father contacts a local physician to come and inspect the bones to make sure that they're human and to get advice as to what to do next. When the physician arrives, he examines the remains for several minutes and concludes that they certainly are human, but judging on their aged appearance and having had similar experiences in the past, he explains to the men that they probably stumbled across an old Indian burial ground, something that was extremely common in Standish. His advice was to respect the dead, rebury the bones, and be done with it. So the two would do just that. And although neither of them were happy that someone was buried underneath the home, they did what they could to be as respectful as possible. Feeling good about the reburial, they would continue fixing up the house. And several weeks later, Randy would move in. This newfound sense of freedom was coupled with something strange and new. Something about the discovery seems to have a grip on Randy. It disturbed, but also intrigued him. He develops a fascination with Indian burial grounds and their mysterious nature. Hungry for more knowledge, on his lunch break at work one day, Randy decides to stop into a bookstore to see just what he can find on the subject. As he perused the aisle of books, one in particular seemed to call out to him. It was a leather-bound book with golden lettering. Its title read, Witchcraft in Practice and Study. Drawn to it, he opens the book to reveal its contents, and the first page he reads says that spirits can manifest from consecrated burial grounds. Reading further, he comes across a list of spirits that the book said could be communicated with the most, and that these powerful entities had never been human, but rather existed in a state between heaven and hell. And if one were to conjure these spirits, each one could assist in certain ways. One of those ways was the discovery of buried riches. Upon reading this sentence, Randy's eyes widened. In the Irvin family, it was discussed that many moons ago, their relatives had buried some valuable goods deep within the earth, but where remained a mystery. Greatly intrigued in what this book had to offer, Randy would purchase it from the store and return to work to finish his shift. In the words of Randy himself, I kept this purchase very secret. I didn't tell my friends, family, or anybody. I wanted to experiment on my own without anyone else coming in and telling me not to do it or that it was dumb. This was my personal decision to venture, and I wasn't going to be disturbed while doing that. Later that day, Randy would return home with his new book. Sitting on his couch and placing it on his coffee table, he unfurled its pages and began to read. The book laid out various instructions for the conjuring of spirits, prerequisites, if you will. He had to control his environment. This meant no music, no light, and total concentration when performing the ritual. After ensuring that these prerequisites were met, he places a chair in his living room, and with dusk now settling on the horizon, his windows open to a light breeze, Randy sits mostly in darkness. Shrouded in the shadows, he begins to read out loud, following the book's instructions to conjure 4 spirits, entities who will supposedly assist him with specific tasks if successful. He would recite the following, calling forth each creature by its name. I call the 4 to come to me: Anastasia, Lavariki, Corazonia, Simasani. In this place that I dwell, to bring you here with this spell. What is dark to be filled with light. Bring these spirits into sight. He chants the spell multiple times, and suddenly, a strong gust of cold wind blows through his living room windows. This knocks over a shelf and a lamp. The odd thing is, there is no strong wind on the forecast for the day. Startled, but not fully convinced, he closes both of them and sits back down to speculate. In his own words, they were supposed to show up immediately. I expected perhaps some voices, maybe writing on the wall. I waited and waited and thought maybe I did something wrong. So I decided to try again another time. I closed the book and got ready for bed. Randy would lay down for the night and begin to sleep, thinking that no one had answered his calls. However, the very next night, something indeed did. As he again lays in his bed sleeping, he is suddenly flung back into reality through the sound of glass breaking coming from his living room. Worried that someone had broken into his home, he grabs a baseball bat and apprehensively makes his way towards the room. Swallowing his fear, he rushes towards the sound. When he gets close enough, he would come face to face with nothing. Confused and on high alert now, he glances around the room but sees no intruder. But then he hears multiple footsteps behind him. Rushing towards those, he's once again bewildered. There's no one there. After a sweep of the entire home, and with this the discovery that all of its doors and windows had seemingly been untouched, he spent some time pondering just what exactly had happened, but finally decides to lay back down to salvage what little sleep is left. The following morning, he's thrust awake yet again, but this time it's by the ringing of a telephone. It's his mother, Belva. She's calling from Mississippi. She moved there after her and Randy's father got a divorce some years ago. The reason for her call is all the more interesting. She had a hunch, a feeling that something was deeply wrong, and she felt compelled to move back as soon as possible. In the words of Randy, she felt like something was out of sorts, that she needed to come back immediately. Was it a clairvoyant type of thing? She said, something has happened. I don't know what it is, but I'm gonna find out. Randy and Belva had always been very close. The two have also had a knack for sensing each other's emotions. Tammy Irvin, Randy's younger sister, who was 11 years old at that time, couldn't hear the details, but she too sensed something was wrong with her brother. The phone call would end shortly after, and a month later, Belva and Tammy would arrive at Randy's doorstep, finally returning to Michigan and moving in with Randy. Tammy would later describe her brother when she arrived. He looked pale and sick. He had lost a lot of weight and didn't look good at all. He looked tired. Shrugging things off as a lack of sleep, Randy would begin to show his sister around the house. His mother was invited as well, but she had a terrible feeling in the pit of her stomach. Something about the home seemed off. As she examines the front room just past the front door, she is suddenly enveloped in an icy cold embrace, one that causes her to physically chatter her teeth. She is only shaken out of her experience by the call of Randy for her to join them in the tour. This afternoon would continue rather uneventfully. That was until the trio laid down their heads for sleep that night. As a glowing white moon hung above them, they drifted off to dreamland. That was until they all were abruptly woken up by the blaring sound of an organ playing some kind of haunting hymn. Randy panicked, and sitting up out of his bed, he suddenly sees the door creak open. It's his mom. She was asking what the hell was happening. She asked him to please turn his radio off. But to her bewilderment, Randy tells her he doesn't have a radio in this room. The two then frantically begin searching around the room, heading towards the origin of the sound, the right-hand corner, perhaps thinking a friend had left a radio, or something of the sort. They would find no such radio, and the organ music would cease. Upon asking just what it could have been by Randy, Belva attributes the music to her late mother, who had quite the affinity for playing the organ. But Randy would also question back, how could it be Grandma, Mom? She's dead. Belva still believes the sign to be something positive, thinking it was her mother's way of letting them know that she was still there and watching over them all. She then would lay back down for the night given the hour. And Randy, left alone once again to his thoughts, sits in fear. He's worried that the bizarre song had something to do with the spirits he invoked. That night after night, his sleep has become less and less attainable, and he can't bring himself to tell his mom that he's been dabbling in the occult. He tries to brush things off and lays his head back down on his pillow. He slowly drifts back to sleep. However, he is again woken up by something that he can't explain. Something that grips him in pure terror. A deep, guttural growl, as if someone or something is stalking him. Feeling the presence of whatever this was, he would put his hand out in its general direction, only to feel an icy wind, as if he had touched death itself. Sweating profusely, yet able to see his breath, Randy knows that this is anything but normal. He again hears the unholy growling, and this time it seems to inch closer to him. Feeling the weight as something steps onto his bed, and as his mattress begins to indent, as this invisible creature moves towards him, Randy is shaking. He closes his eyes as the growl seems to be inches from his face. He feels a cold breath on his cheek. And right when he thinks that it's the end of his earthly existence, it vanishes. This leaves Randy a sweaty and emotional mess. Needless to say, he cannot sleep this night. The following morning, as Belva cooks breakfast for everyone, a disgruntled and exhausted Randy stumbles into the kitchen. He again is faced with internal thoughts of who he can tell, who would be willing to listen, and he doesn't want to frighten his family either. In his own words, I knew I had dabbled with something dark, that I had unleashed something evil, but any harm, any torment it could inflict, only I wanted to endure it, because it was my fault, and I was willing to see this through to the end. And although not much occurs during the day, when the sun goes down and the moon rises, whatever entities seem to awaken to haunt him. Laying his head down to sleep, petrified every night, he is often woken up by ethereal growls, deep, disgusting snarls, the likes of which one has seldomly heard before. This particular night, whatever this creature was, knocked over his shelf and then pulled the sheets from his bed and off of Randy, and then walked onto his bed and began grabbing him. The sensation similar to frozen claws, pulling and tugging at his very soul. In his words, "The claws or teeth never broke my skin, but I could feel how sharp they were. I was truly fearful." He screams, being reduced to tears. The sound of her son's screams draw Belva to his room, rushing in a panic to quickly see just what had happened. She finds Randy pacing and looking over his shoulders, shaking like a leaf. She asks him what is wrong, to which he would reply, "Every night it's something. Every night I hear the music or the footsteps. I hear growling at the foot of my bed, and something just tried to rip me apart." Almost as soon as the words left his lips, Randy and Belva both would hear a growl originate from behind his TV on his dresser. The temperature in the room seemed to drop significantly. Believing whatever it was to be evil, Belva grabs her Bible and begins to recite verses. Meanwhile, Tammy in her room can only hear the growling and her mother reciting the passages. She is frightened, but not aware of the full details of what was happening. It takes several minutes, but the repeated verses seem to work, because the violent growls slowly subside into silence. Randy prays that this will be the end of his horrible affliction, but time will tell that it's far from it. His days begin to be affected by his lack of sleep. He's emotionally as well as physically exhausted. He begins making mistakes at his job, but this is far from his main worry. He tries to regain a sense of normalcy by spending time with his sister, often watching TV with her in the living room. But all too often, he finds his mind trailing off until the inevitable mysterious sounds beckon him back to reality. This particular day, he heard banging coming from a storage room in the hallway. Leaving Tammy to watch TV, he goes to investigate. The bangs turn into scratches as Randy approaches the room. The room in question is being used as storage, mostly for Randy's father, keeping antiques that he had recently acquired. As Randy apprehensively steps towards the door and his hand grips the knob, he still hears commotion coming from behind it. However, the door is locked. Also hearing the commotion, Belva joins him in the hallway, curious as to just what it could be. Continuing to hear motion from behind the door, she too tries the knob and then presses her ear to the door to try and discern just what could be making the noise. As she listens, she is suddenly gripped by unseen hands. Her body pulled against the door, lifting her off of her feet and towards the ceiling, choking her. Randy desperately tries to free his mother from the invisible devil's grip. Tammy, hearing the commotion, rushes into the hallway as well to find her mother struggling to breathe and her feet dangling mid-air. Not knowing what else to do, Randy runs as fast as he can to obtain his mother's Bible. He returns and places it against her. And this again seems to break the demonic chains that grip her. Falling back to the ground, she begins sobbing with Tammy as Randy stares, visibly shaken by what he had just witnessed. In his own words, "This thing had her in a chokehold and was lifting her off of the ground. I believe it was trying to choke the life out of her. This situation in particular is what truly convinced me deep down that these things were evil, that they were out to get us, and it wasn't just me now that was experiencing the torment." As a result of what had happened, Randy, Belva, and Tammy rush out of the house and into Randy's truck. They're unsure of where they will go, but that seemed irrelevant. They knew for certain that they had to get out of that house. Starting the vehicle and thrusting the gas pedal to the floor, the trio speeds away. The results of this night of horror would lead the three of them to move. They would relocate in the next week to another home. This one, a newer house, located on the opposite side of town. Although a much smaller house, it's the only thing that they could find on such short notice. Once moved in, the guilt of what he had done was beginning to take its toll on Randy. He blamed himself for what was happening, that not only he, but now his family were also suffering. He finally decides to come clean. He confesses to his mom that he and his dad had found an old Indian burial site underneath the house, that he had then purchased the book on witchcraft, summoned these spirits, and didn't think it was real until things started happening. Belva is shocked and believed that her son had inadvertently thrust open a door to the spiritual realm, but she chooses to forgive him, hoping that whatever these things were could no longer hurt them. Later that night, as they settle down for sleep in the new house, as Randy gets under the covers and hopes that his mother is right, that he can finally attain a peaceful night's sleep, he takes one final glance at his new room before closing his eyes. But his eyes would pop open when his door flung open by itself. Screaming into the void, "Why don't you just stop? Why don't you just leave us alone?" He is only met with silence. His cries once again summon Tammy and Belva into his room. Upon sitting on his bed, they too begin to hear the ominous sounds once again. The scratching, knocking, and phantom footsteps as before. Randy now knows that these entities don't want the house. They want him. Refusing to give in any longer, he begins to seek outside help for the first time. Although not a religious person and not a member of any church, he first meets with a local Lutheran minister. Stepping into his office within the church and having a seat at his desk, Randy begins to explain to him what has been taking place for the past several months. However, during his explanation, he's interrupted by the minister and told that witchcraft doesn't exist, that demons are simply a delusion. Randy explains that the entities have been experienced by others, that he's awake when they attack, and that they are indeed real. He is met by a diatribe of religious preaching, only to then be met with, "Have you spoken to a therapist?" Flabbergasted at this, Randy then leaves. He just can't believe the lack of assistance. Continuing to further search for help, he didn't know who else to turn to, but he knew that he wanted his life back, that he wanted his family to finally be safe again. He gets to thinking, if witchcraft unleashed these things, could it perhaps banish them? With this in mind, he stops by a local metaphysical shop to ask if anyone would listen to what was happening to him. It's there that he meets a man by the name of Mike Bosick, who is interested in his situation. Mike, as he explains, is a white witch, a practitioner of Wicca, a modern pagan religion. In his own words, a white witch is someone who believes in good, believes in God, and believes in trying to help people. After listening to Randy explain what he had done and how it had affected him and his family, Mike wanted to help. So he offers to come over to the home later that day. To Randy, this seems like a long-awaited answer to his desperate prayers. But will the ritual be a success? Later that evening, after filling in Belva on what he intended to have done, they receive a knock at their door. With a thunderstorm rolling in and a light rain starting, Mike meets them with a bag in hand. After stepping in out of the drizzle, he places his bag on the kitchen table and begins to unpack its belongings. While donning a black cloak, he begins to explain what he intends to do. He first must create a ring of protection around the home. Braving the rain again, he does this using salt, believed to be a purifying substance. He then chants a protective incantation 3 times as he circles the home before returning. It seems that with each chant and each lap, that the storm is intensifying, as if something supernatural was attempting to stop him. This is Mike's first attempt at banishing unwanted spirits from a person's life. He hopes he will be successful, as his intentions are to help this family. Upon completing the circle and coming back indoors, he then, in the center of the house, forms yet another circle of salt, and within this circle, a pentagram. But unlike a satanic pentagram, it is not inverted, and in fact has the opposite intent. He places candles at each one of the pinnacles, and explains to Belva and Randy that the 3 of them must remain in the circle for the entirety of the ritual. Otherwise, their safety may be compromised. The storm outside seems to gain intensity as Mike chants his banishing ritual. The candles at each one of the pentagram's points begins to flicker as shadows trace the walls around them. Mike, then to finish the ritual, after he extinguishes them, the energy in the house seemed to be lighter. This led all 3 of them to smile and begin celebrating that Mike's magic had worked. That was until the lights went out, leaving only lightning to illuminate the room. And then the entire home began to shake. Unbeknownst to the 3 downstairs, Tammy had been asleep in her room, unaware of what was taking place. She is soon woken up by the shaking of the house and sees something outside of her window. Placing her glasses on her face and approaching her curtains, she pulls them back. She sees several branches scraping against her window as a result of the winds of the storm, their leaves being relentlessly pelted by the rain. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, with the flicker of a lightning flash, the most abhorrent creature was staring back at her from behind the glass. A horned abomination with glowing yellow eyes, decaying-looking skin as black as the abyss, with gnarled yet sharp fangs, stared at her with malice and desire. The young girl panics and screams, her cries for help prompting Randy to rush upstairs. He picks her up out of the corner of the room and sees the outline of the horned monstrosity outside of the window. Frantically rushing back down the stairs with his sister, he sets her down next to his mother and confronts Mike. He didn't know at the time that this was Mike's first attempt at banishment, and it now seems that he only added fuel to the fire. Unable to offer another solution, Mike then leaves the home, never to return. Left alone to deal with the aftermath, Randy, Belva, and Tammy sleep together in the living room to watch each other and keep one another safe. The power would return hours after Mike's departure, and needless to say, Randy again, seemingly defeated, would not sleep much this night. Following the chaos of the ritual night, Randy began to fall into a deep depression. Unsure of who to reach out to, he feels as if he was on the brink of insanity, and that he could cross that threshold any moment. Sitting on his lunch break at work one afternoon, dealing with these heavy emotions, he appears visibly upset by his dilemma. He is then approached by his co-worker, Paula. She asks him what was going on, and no longer caring about his perceived craziness, Randy begins to confide in her everything that had been taking place. Surprisingly, Paula doesn't judge him, but rather, she says she knows someone who can help him. She directs him to a woman named Nora Reiner. Paula explains that Nora is a healer, that she had not only assisted her in the past, but is known for helping people who are being oppressed by evil spirits. Feeling as if he's got nothing to lose, he agrees to go and see her that day. He would arrive at the address he was given shortly after departing work, a business called Nora's Hair and Nails. Unsure if Nora could help him or not, but again feeling as if he had nothing to lose, Randy makes his way inside the salon. He then meets Nora for the first time. Her first impression of Randy is the following. When I saw Randy, he was in a terrible physical state. He was very thin, very nervous, very anxious, and looked sickly. She sensed that he was deeply tormented, and so she asked what was bothering him, not having been previously told what he was there for. Randy would give a rough explanation of what he had done, and would follow it up with, "I just want to die." She told him that she believed that she had received a gift from God, and asked him if she could say a prayer for him out loud to try and help him, and if he could repeat this prayer with her and mean every word of what was being said. Nora then says a prayer of deliverance, calling upon Jesus to cast out demons. Randy, although desperately trying, finds himself unable to recite the prayer back to Nora. He then goes unconscious. Sitting in a haircutting chair whilst this is taking place, his head, which was folded down into his chest, picks back up, but the eyes that had been looking into Nora's were no longer there. They had instead gone entirely black. The word sausage would erupt from Randy's lips, only to be followed by a horrendous scream, one that sounded like multiple men yelling at once. The chair would then be thrust backwards and make contact with a nearby wall, throwing Randy onto the floor. He would once again open his eyes to reveal abyssal orbs staring at Nora, and would let out a deep growl. In Nora's words, "I had prayed and delivered many people before, but had never seen or experienced or ever thought that something like this could happen." Grabbing a nearby crucifix off the wall, Nora presented it to Randy. He then began to make what can only be described as the noise of an angry cat, but in a much lower tone. And then his throat began to bulge, as if he had swallowed a grapefruit. Continuing to pray and plead with Jesus to cast out the unholy spirits out of Randy, as the horrendous screams tear from his mouth, she places the crucifix to his chest and with one final scream, the bulge in his throat dissipates, and he goes silent and still. After several tense minutes, Randy wakes up and begins to weep. He said that Jesus saved him, that he felt truly free. Accompanying Randy home, Nora then meets his family and blesses their house for them. But she doesn't stop there. She convinces them to allow her to bless the original home, or as she put it, the place where evil had first been released. In the words of Randy, Nora had felt that a bottomless pit had been opened up within the walls of that home, and she wanted to close it. In Nora's words, there truly is a darkness that hopes to find those that seek it with curiosity, so that it may take advantage of those people and wreak havoc in their lives. Nora would conclude the blessing, and all four of them would leave the house, never to return. All demonic activity from there on out would cease. But before we conclude today's episode, let us first ponder some questions I found myself asking as I explored this interesting case. Do you think the Native American bones had anything to do with the initial haunting? Personally, aside from perhaps inspiring a darker curiosity that led to Randy seeking the occult, it doesn't seem so, unless this was the intended consequences by those whose resting place had been disturbed. I also feel this way considering how regular of a finding it was in Standish. Secondly, although I researched the supposed demons, I wasn't able to find much. Perhaps these particular deities aren't very well known, or perhaps their names had been changed to protect anyone who may seek them out as a result of this story by Randy. It's hard telling. I also think that it's interesting that those who summon demons typically do so for their supposed powers or assistance with particular tasks. Although I obviously don't practice this, it would be interesting to hear if anyone has, or have they been successful in their endeavors, or if it's always just a trick, a way in. If Randy was aware that these summoned spirits were tormenting him, why would he allow for his mother and sister to move in with him? Don't you think this would be kind of a no-brainer? Perhaps he didn't have the forethought to think that they might affect them. Then again, he was a younger man at the time. Why did the minister refuse to offer real help to Randy in his attempts to free himself? How can one believe in Christian teachings and the Bible and yet not believe in demons? This one really perplexed me, because it's like wanting your cake and eating it too. One can't really exist without the other. Good can't truly exist without evil. Because of the minister's failure, Randy then sought out non-conventional help with Mike. Mike obviously had good intentions, but was inexperienced. He certainly should have shared that with Randy prior to coming to perform a ritual at his house. A ritual which made things exponentially worse. Then, to just up and leave, following making things worse, was certainly not a good move. And during said ritual, why in God's name did no one think to at least bring Tammy, who was 11 at the time, into the protection circle? But rather, just to leave her to her own devices during this supernatural battle. This one, too, had me questioning Randy and Belva's competency. And last, but certainly not least, because I'm sure there are other questions that you guys will bring up or come up with on your own. When Randy met with Nora, and an exorcism essentially began, he said the word "sessage" before hurling back and then out of his chair. This is Jesus spelled backwards. Do you think whatever entities that inhabited him did this to mock him? Also, the lack of sleep, no doubt in my mind, played a major role in breaking Randy down in order for him to be possessed. I would consider this the previous state of oppression. But all this speculation aside, a few things are certain. There is a dark world that exists beyond our veil of comprehension, an abyss that hosts abhorrent and terrifying entities. And if you dabble in the occult, especially if you're an inexperienced person, you might not seek to contact them per se, but they might just take an interest in you. Think of it as sending out a beacon of light in the dead of night. They might notice you, begin to crave you, until they finally find a way into your life and begin to stalk, oppress, and eventually consume you. Be wary, be vigilant, and don't let that be you.
How far would you go to save someone you loved? Would you spend all of your money trying to find the best treatment? Would you sacrifice a part of your very soul? When a caretaker performs what's supposed to be an ancient healing ritual on her friend's ailing grandmother, she unknowingly unleashes a terrifying and powerful demon, an entity that claimed to be one of the 7 princes of hell. Will all those involved have their lives be torn apart as the malevolent demon haunts and torments their every waking moments? Or can they somehow be saved? This is the untold story of the Deborah Moffat case, also known as the Deadly Haunting or Mr. Entity case, which took place in California. And this is truly one you don't want to enjoy with the lights off. The following story has been sourced from Deborah Moffat's own words, as well as several outside resources to try and form the most cohesive timeline possible. Not all names were able to be found, but I've done my best to provide the most accurate story that I can. Our story begins in 1984, when the grandmother-in-law of another woman who will become integral to our story, a woman named Deborah Moffat, suffered a terrible and debilitating stroke. As a result of this unfortunate occurrence, she required around-the-clock care. To compensate for this, the family all chipped in and pooled together enough money to go ahead and hire a caretaker for her, someone who they trusted. A nearby neighbor and friend of the family, a middle-aged lady from Guatemala named Juanita. This arrangement was both a godsend for Juanita as well as the family. It allowed Juanita to stay in the United States on her work visa and earn a nice living while providing aid to her friends. And it allowed the family's dear loved one to be taken care of by someone who they knew and trusted. Although this is somewhat controversial, this woman was an avid practitioner of what's known as Santeria. Santeria is an African diasporic religion that developed in Cuba during the late 19th century. It arose through a process of syncretism between the traditional Yoruba religion of West Africa and the Catholic form of Christianity and spiritualism. Offerings to the Arika, or various gods, often included fruit, liquor, flowers, and sacrificed animals. In the months to come, Grandma's recovery was not going well. If anything, unfortunately, she was getting worse. Much worse. Each day her state seemed to deteriorate more. Worried about her friends and their grandmother, as well as her own well-being, thinking that perhaps if Grandma passed away that she would no longer be able to reside in California due to the loss of her job and the high cost of living and having to compete in the job market to keep her work visa, Juanita decided to take matters into her own hands. She decided to try an ancient Santeria healing spell in hopes that it would allow everyone involved, but especially for Grandma, to do better. However, this ritual would prove to be anything but helpful. Grandma, in fact, would not get better. Weeks following the ritual, she would ultimately pass away. Not only did she pass away and her family was devastated, but Juanita would indeed lose her job as a result. I tried to dig to uncover any and all details as far as what happened to Juanita, but I was unable to find anything. My best guess is that perhaps with the loss of her caretaker position, she either couldn't afford to live in the area anymore, and or she went back to her native country. But those are just speculation on my part. Deborah and her husband Bill would inherit the home, and in due time would move into it following Grandma's funeral. At first, all would be rather normal and quiet within the house, but that would ultimately change with the birth of Debbie and Bill's first child in 1987, their first son. Bill was a big sports memorabilia collector and had a particular spare bedroom dedicated to his hobby. He was especially fond of bobbleheads, particularly baseball bobbleheads. It's important to know that they kept this room locked at all times, and Bill was the only person who had a key to enter it. One seemingly normal day, Deborah, Bill, and a friend who lived nearby were headed into the house to show the friend just how extensive the collection had become. My best guess is that this gentleman was also very much into sports as well. As they opened the door and began to walk into the room, they were shocked by what they saw. All of the bobbleheads on the toys had been removed, from the ones on the shelves to the walls and cabinets, and all of them had been laid together in the center of the floor to form a triangle of sorts. Not only was Bill upset and shocked by this, but the group wasn't sure of what to make of this happening. They somehow thought that someone had managed to break into the room to play a prank on them, but as to why they would have played such a prank on them and who would have done it was uncertain at best. Following this happening, only more bizarre things began to manifest. But as they typically do, these manifestations started small. Grandma had been a very religious lady, and in the room that was hers, she kept a bedside table with several icons, those of which contained both Jesus and the Virgin Mary. In honor of her, they had kept that table and those icons in the same place that she had left them. One morning, as Deborah was cleaning house, she noticed that a pair of her husband's briefs were draped over the biggest statue of Jesus on the very same table. Not only did her husband not change in this room, but she knew how close Bill was to his grandmother, and how he would never have done anything to disrespect her or her things. Thinking that somehow it must have been an accident, and unnerved at the strangeness yet again, the couple was unsure of what they were dealing with. And not making it a priority or jumping to conclusions, since they were dealing with a newborn, I can't say I blamed them, because that's always going to be at the forefront of your mind. As soon as their son was roughly a month old, yet another weird thing would occur. The couple this evening had been out at a relative's house for dinner, and as food was ate, laughs were had, and dusk turned into night. They would say their goodbyes and begin traversing the winding roads back home. Upon arrival, they placed their keys in their door and stepped inside of their house to begin to wind down. They flicked on their living room light switch, and as the lights illuminated, they would see a bizarre, enigmatic symbol drawn on the wall. Describing it later, Deborah would refer to it as something that she had never really seen before, like a series of triangles with tails. But yet again, a triangle was involved. As they surveyed the house, they noticed that the symbols weren't just on the first wall in the living room. They were on all of the walls, in what would turn out to be the entire house, each of them appearing to have been drawn in some kind of a charcoal-like substance. Bill and Debbie again weren't sure of what to make of this, so they went to the logical headspace that perhaps somehow someone was pranking them yet again, or they were breaking into their house, both of which were unnerving at best, and both of which didn't make any sense. The pranking because they didn't really have a relationship with anyone like that, let alone they hadn't given access to their house to anyone else, and with someone intruding into their home, all of their doors and windows were locked, and none of their belongings or valuables would be missing. It would take several hours, but they would eventually settle and fall asleep this very night, despite the confusion and now fear that someone was truly messing with them. 5 days following this night, as Bill rearranged his sports room, Deborah had taken up the task of cleaning the living room. On one of their walls, there was a long shelf filled with little keepsakes and knickknacks. She had glanced at the shelf while sweeping the floor, and then again looked back at it. And as she would describe later, it was like as if in the blink of an eye, every single item on that shelf was turned backwards. Upon coming out of his sports room, Bill was told by Deborah what had taken place, but at the time refused to believe it, saying that she couldn't have seen it right to begin with. However, Debbie knew what she had seen and just how impossible it would have been for them to all be facing backwards. But she was the only one who ever touched them. But despite trying to approach the situations logically, these illogical happenings would only continue. 1 week later, the two would arrive home to discover a lamp sitting in the middle of their living room, with nothing else in the home out of place, and nothing being wrong with any of the doors or windows. Debbie began to think that perhaps something was taking place that they couldn't understand. Bill harbored a deep fear of the paranormal, and with these realizations, somewhat went into a state of denial, utterly refusing to believe that something even remotely close as such could be taking place, let alone to them. The lamp would be placed back on the shelf where it was supposed to be, and following this, the two headed into the kitchen as Bill continued to try and rationalize and come up with excuses as to what was happening to them. After having a brief discussion, and without hearing so much as the smallest of sounds, the couple would re-emerge into their living room after roughly 2 to 3 minutes and would be shaken to their core. Before their very eyes, they would find all of their furniture rearranged and stacked, one piece on top of the other. It was as if the entire room had been shifted upside down, but all within mere minutes, and essentially in dead silence. At this point, there was no way to deny that they were indeed dealing with something beyond their normal realm of comprehension. But with this realization, the two had completely different thoughts about the matter. Deborah was apprehensive yet fascinated as to what could be happening. And Bill, surprisingly, was done denying what was taking place and was ready to move immediately and leave everything behind. Debbie would end up placing the furniture back to normal in the living room. Bill didn't even want to be inside of the house, so he stood outside. He would then refuse to have anything to do with the activity from this point onward, essentially heading back into denial. To Deborah, the feeling wasn't a malevolent one at first. She saw it as almost a game of sorts. Whether this would prove to be detrimental or not later is up to you. With these feelings, she would begin to try and communicate with the presence daily, asking it to move things around to prove that it was there. And incredibly, it, whatever it was, would oblige. This action would begin a cat and mouse game that went on for roughly a week or so, until one day, it randomly ceased. Eventually, due to Bill's lack of comfort, the couple would purchase and move into the house next door and would keep their old home as a rental property for several years. This decision would result in an eventual revolving door of tenants, some of them staying a year or so, but most of them just staying several months and leaving without giving a reason. It's important to note here that Bill would actually mention that the property could possibly be haunted, but most people laughed at the idea. Perhaps it was the times. Perhaps people back then weren't as open-minded to the world of the paranormal as they are now. After several years of renting out their home, Bill and Debbie and several other surviving family members decided that they would sell their current homes and rental properties and purchase one large home and share the space as one big family. Once this was tackled, and after several days of moving their own belongings to the new home, on the final day at their old house, something peculiar happened. Deborah and a relative were gathering the final boxes from a room in the back of the house, when suddenly they heard what they described as an explosion come from the kitchen. Dropping the boxes and bolting to the origin of the noise to see just what had happened, the two ladies were left speechless. All of the cabinets, the countertops, everything had been ripped from the walls, and pieces of them now lay all over the floor. Before they could begin to process what had just taken place, they would hear another loud explosion, but this time it came from the bedroom that they had just ran from. Running back there, they again would be astonished. Every window in the back bedroom had been blown out with absolutely no explanation. Shards of glass littered the carpet and covered the final boxes they sought to move out. Wasting no time, Debbie grabbed the relative by the arm, and the two fled to the car, leaving the final boxes behind. They would leave the property as quickly as they could. It was within these moments that Deborah now knew that whatever the force was that they had been dealing with was not benevolent, and in fact seemed hostile. Trying to come to terms with what had just happened, shaking with fear, she drove to the new house, and the two would spend the rest of the day trying to forget what had just happened. For the first several days, everything seemed to be quiet and calm in the new house, as the family all together unpacked and got settled into their new life together. The dynamic consisted of Deborah and Bill in the master bedroom downstairs, and Bill's mother and father upstairs in the other master bedroom. Two other relatives lived there as well, but I wasn't able to find additional details as to their exact relation or the time frame in which they ended up staying or leaving. But sometimes it's people that are haunted, not places. So yet again, the Moffats would find themselves plagued by the same malevolent force that had previously stalked them from the shadows. The entity, like a feral beast who had simply been wounded, had nursed those wounds and seemed hell-bent on revenge. With the reappearance of this malevolent force, certain members of the family were opposed to seeking assistance, while others felt that it was necessary to do. Those opposing believed that they would be made a mockery of, considered crazy, and dismissed, leaving their reputations in shambles. But together, they all believed that this problem was way too far out of their scope of normalcy to be able to tackle themselves. As the family stood divided against one another, the entity began to further isolate them individually. Not only could they certainly not have any guests over for fear that they too would be affected, but wherever they seemed to go, it would follow. It continuously made them so uncomfortable that they soon quit going places altogether, except for their essentials. For example, on one occasion, Deborah and Bill had been at one of Bill's friends' homes for dinner. They would have a nice time, but this would be all too short-lived. Upon their return to the house, on the kitchen table was the friend's wallet. They had just been inside of his house, and as one might imagine, this would be more than enough to chill someone to the bone. It was as if the entity was telling them to stop, or else someone else might get hurt. The Moffats, now beside themselves with fear, were also worried just how they would explain to their friend why they had his wallet, or just what he would say or think. In an effort to try and seek some sort of help, Deborah was able to convince most of her family to go and visit a local but well-known psychologist to make sure it wasn't some kind of mass hysteria, or that someone, herself included, hadn't somehow convinced themselves and everyone else that something paranormal was taking place when it wasn't. The psychologist, whose name was never disclosed, was based out of Rancho Cucamonga, California, and was apprehensive at first, but who can blame them? But after much explaining and meeting with the members of the family together and separately, the psychologist would come to the conclusion that something strange was indeed taking place, something that they couldn't help with. Unable to assist the family further, they told them that they needed to seek the help of a parapsychologist, a religious institution, or some other party that studies these kinds of things. So following the psychologist's advice, with most of Bill's family being religious, Catholic specifically, they would seek the help of the church that they attended. The church agreed to help them and would send a priest to bless their home. And after several weeks after their meeting, an older priest would arrive at their house. Upon crossing the threshold of the home and into the foyer, the priest would take out his holy water and begin to sprinkle it on the walls around him and make the sign of the cross towards the hallway. Oddly, though, he refused to go any further into the home. When asked, "Aren't you supposed to bless every room?" the priest would rebuttal, No, this should be more than enough. I have to go now." In further effort to get him to do what he was supposed to do, the family explained all of what had been taking place. The priest would make eye contact with Deborah and say, "Women, when they get older, they tend to get a little crazy. Now excuse me, I have to go." Then without another word, he exited the door and left in his vehicle. The family noticed he had seemed unnerved or slightly scared while he was at the house, but they were also totally flabbergasted at his odd response to them and their legitimate attempts to seek assistance. Thus they were again left without any real help, believing the blessing to be rather subpar. Bill's mother, Lee, who was the most religious out of all of them, was simply crushed at the church's response and never truly seemed the same following this incident. The entity seemed to latch onto this and began to feed upon her negativity following what had taken place. It began to torment her day in and day out. Some examples of what it would do to her would be to destroy her belongings. It would make her shoes disappear, as in one shoe would go missing from a pair. It destroyed her purse, wallet, credit cards, and licenses multiple times, and it would hide things from her if it didn't destroy them. It was as if to say that I'm the one that's in control, and you'll own things only if I say that you can. Having very bad eyesight most of her life, the creature would take Lee's glasses away from her, or smash them, and while she was unable to see, it would manifest itself as a large, terrifying, foreboding figure, which without her glasses, to Lee seemed like a massive black mist. Then it would often touch or abuse her. The demon also began to have a peculiar obsession with knives. Knives began appearing stuck in the walls, and frighteningly, under chairs. So if someone sat down, they would greatly injure themselves. And these knives, stranger still, were not the family's knives. They had absolutely no idea where they came from. The intensity of the knife situation would escalate to the point to where they were being placed upright under pillows, and Lee again seemed to bear the brunt of the abuse. The Moffats were seemingly beat down into a corner, and as they sat there, they collectively wondered just how they could defend themselves against something that they couldn't see. Just how could they defeat an entity that shouldn't exist? The torture would continue for the family as a whole, but it was being done as if the demon was wanting to communicate some kind of message. One day, an unmistakable sign would appear, indeed communicating, the first in what would become many. The entity began to write on various mirrors throughout the house, and soap. Its first message appearing to Lee, saying, "Talk to me." And this particular message appeared shortly after the family had come home from getting groceries together, trying to regain some sense of normalcy. At first, wanting to make sure it wasn't one of the family members playing a trick on the others, which would be pretty horrible at this point, to be honest. They cleaned the mirror thoroughly, and then everyone convened in the bedroom together, saying that if there was additional writing on the mirror following them cleaning it within the next several minutes, then the event is indeed real. After approximately 15 minutes of waiting, they reluctantly re-entered the bathroom to find the words "Nini, don't go into the attic" written on the mirror. Upon reading this, Lee froze in her tracks. There was only one person who ever called her that nickname, or was even aware of it, and that was her long-deceased sister. From here, the days would turn into nights, and the messages would continue, becoming more sadistic, controlling, and abusive. For the next year, the family would be held hostage by what they now believed to be a demonic entity. The messages were more or less commands or insults, and the spirit wouldn't answer any of their questions in response to them. It got to the point that if they sought to go places for any reason, they had to ask permission. Otherwise, they would have car issues or damage, such as broken windshields, headlights, or even engine failure. Eventually, out of frustration, Bill's father would ask the name of the entity in hopes that they could figure out just what it was and what it wanted and why it tormented them all in an effort to put a stop to it. And upon asking, they all would finally receive an answer. There, scribbled on the mirror, was the name Prince. And following them receiving this name, they would hear a commotion coming from all over the house below them. Rushing down the stairs, they would find many of their items and furniture broken in pieces, and several symbols scribbled on the walls and floors. The symbol, as vaguely mentioned before, involved triangles and small offshoot characters. The shape over time would be scribbled, carved, and even burned into walls, floors, and furniture within the home. Following this event, each day seemed to mirror the last. It almost always started with the family having to put the home back together. Everything would be in complete disarray upon them waking up, each and every morning. And wherever they went, it went. If they went out to eat, even upon asking permission, when they would return, the name tag of the waiter or waitress would be on the table. And one time, a massive bite was taken out of the mother-in-law's steak, just mere seconds after she received it, with no rational origin as to how it happened. This state of utter imprisonment and constant battle with an enemy that they couldn't see led the family to seek additional help to try and free themselves of the hell that they now lived in. They would go through a long list of reputable people and organizations to try and escape, but nothing seemed to work. Some of these included Lloyd Auerbach and his connections to various paranormal societies. One such society consisted of Christopher Chacon, another well-known name in the paranormal world, and his investigation team. They were unable to make sense of the situation and ultimately couldn't help the Moffats. The Moffats would reach out to various religious organizations of differing faiths. They tried having magicians come out, and they would even make contact with Thelma Moss, who would send Carrie Gaynor out to investigate. The very same Thelma Moss and Carrie Gaynor that were involved in the San Pedro haunting, as well as the entity, or better known as the Doris Bither case. And yet no one could get rid of it. No amount of blessings, rituals, or investigations seemed to work. They would have shamans out, Wiccans, and even the Warrens, and still no one could help them. As the years trickled by ever slowly, agonizingly, things had not improved. Rather, it had become so violent and dangerous within the house that the entire family, Both Bill's parents, Bill and Deborah, and their son, were all sleeping in the lower living room together and would not separate for fear of what would happen. The demon, known as Prince, had taken over the entire upstairs. One night, Deborah, on behalf of her mother-in-law, decided to risk it and head upstairs to grab some medication that had been left behind that she desperately needed. Upon opening the door and walking into this now claimed domain, every fiber of her being was telling her to turn around and run. Persisting, she made her way past all the broken furniture and utter chaos to where the medication was. And after grasping the bottle in her palm, turning around to head back downstairs, she heard a low, growling noise behind her, originating from the attic. There, in the flesh, was the disembodied head of a grotesque creature, grayish in appearance, with the blackest, most soulless eyes imaginable. A twisted horn emerged from its temple and up over its head. This caused an involuntary scream to erupt from Deborah's mouth, straight from the depths of her soul. She then, with everything she had, ran back downstairs. She believed that this indeed was the entity known as Prince's true form. Things from here continue to go downhill as they do, and would escalate in intensity and torture. Lee one morning went to grab something from the pantry in the kitchen, a place for the most part where they felt safe in, since it was on the ground level of the house. As she opened the door and stepped into the walk-in pantry to grab the item that she was after, suddenly, behind her, the door slammed shut. She then felt invisible hands grab her throat and squeeze, picking her up, her feet leaving the floor and dangling. As she struggled to breathe, feeling as if it was the end, when everything began to go black, the hands suddenly released, and she collapsed down to the floor. Her husband would be the first to rush to her aid, and she would be hysterical after coming back to consciousness. Prince clearly had the power to take a human life, or so it seemed, but chose not to. Was this because it wanted to feed upon misery versus taking a soul, or for some other reason? Did demons perhaps have rules they had to abide by? Deborah had finally reached her breaking point. She stormed into the upstairs bathroom and demanded answers from Prince. She told the being that the family was no longer to be touched, that they would respect its space if it would respect theirs. And surprisingly, she began to receive replies on the mirror in the same fashion as the entity had always communicated, by writing on it. Prince said that he would no longer bother any other member of the family, but that Lee had been promised to him many moons ago, and that he had come to collect. Deborah would ask the creature to elaborate, and for the next hour, the entity would write on the mirror. Deborah would erase the writing, wait, go back, read, and repeat, until the full story had been told. Not wanting to allow Prince to have any sort of power over her, Deborah decided to start referring to him as Mr. Entity, essentially leaving him a nameless face, but with a respectable title, as they had agreed upon. Here I wanted to mention a few of the smaller details I uncovered. From the time of Grandma's old house till now, the family did also experience paranormal manifestations that we commonly come across, such as putrid odors, knocking, and banging throughout the home, all with no rational origin, and rarely seen, but somewhat indicative of a more powerful entity. They also experienced an infestation. Some people experience insects from what I've come across. The Moffats, however, had a terrible rat problem, but one that came out of nowhere and then disappeared roughly 2 weeks later, again with no cause. Another disturbing thing that Mr. Entity had taken to doing was ending the lives of the family's dogs if it didn't get what it wanted. There are more details on what happened to several of the pets, but the details are gruesome. And if I've learned anything from my prior videos, it's that it's really not necessary to include this kind of information. I just wanted to say that it happened, and it happened more than once in this case. Oftentimes, the ending to these kinds of cases can be anticlimactic, and this one, despite how incredible of a story it is no exception. After 6 agonizing years, with dozens of seasoned paranormal investigators, religious leaders, shamans, occult magicians, and more, assisting the Moffats with the demon known as Prince, no relief was provided for all of those years. Prince continued to plague their lives until one day the entity simply was no longer there. Following the creature's departure, Debbie, Bill, and the family would destroy lots of photos, but keep some in storage, but stored in the attic. They would also for years stop speaking about what they had endured for fear of whatever it was would come back. But thankfully, for whatever reason, it never did. Debbie and Bill would go on to raise their family and eventually move on, with Debbie becoming an author and spiritual advisor, not only to assist others who may have experienced something similar, but to also share her extensive knowledge and hellish waking life that her and her family endured under the reign of Prince. I'll be leaving links to her books on this video, as well as in the description, because they're certainly worth checking out, as well as several other resources I used to research this case. As we conclude our story, as always, I'd like to give some of my thoughts I've had while researching this very unhinged but perplexing case. Was this spirit demonic? A familiar of sort? A jinn, as we'll see in a moment? Or perhaps something pretending to be more than what it was? We will never have definitive answers for these questions, but in my opinion, Prince, or Mr. Entity, whatever it was certainly incredibly powerful, especially given the destruction it was alleged to have perpetrated, given the descriptions given by Debbie in various interviews, her own books, and photos, both provided by her. And again, in my opinion, the entity was certainly demonic. I think true demonic hauntings are not only extremely rare, but incredibly dangerous, with the spirits having the ability to cause tangible physical and mental harm to all involved. Demons aren't all-powerful, but they are more intelligent than we are, and can foresee things that we simply cannot. When explaining this story as to why it sought and tormented Lee so hard, that apparently she had been promised many moons or years ago, this is what leads me to believe that perhaps someone in their lineage promised their descendants in exchange for something, whether it was money, fame, or what have you. Perhaps the entity had finally come to collect its dead, the soul that was bartered during said exchange. Now, I don't think that it was a human spirit pretending to be something it wasn't. A prince of hell, I'm not totally convinced of. But most hauntings, the beings don't have half the ability of what Prince supposedly did. Many years following the events of the Moffat family haunting, during an interview with the late great Art Bell, Debbie would speak with a guest who seemingly identified the symbol that Prince, or Mr. Entity, had supposedly used. It was a symbol he had come across during his time in the army while in Afghanistan. Further investigation revealed on his behalf that this symbol was that of Iblis, which is known as a jinn from the Quran. It's known as the leader of the devils in Islam. Iblis was thrown out of heaven after he refused to prostrate himself before Adam. It's also known as the father of bitterness. This certainly would explain the power behind Prince, that's for sure. All around, this case is incredible, perplexing, and terrifying. Taking things at Deborah Moffat's word, I can only vaguely relate to just how terrible her and her family's experience dealing with this must have been. And one thing is for certain, whether Prince was indeed a prince of hell as it claimed to be, or just a very powerful entity, it certainly tormented this family as if they had been sent to the seventh circle themselves.
Deep within the shadows of our collective consciousness lies the eerie concept of demonic possession, a haunting notion that has lingered through the ages, weaving its tendrils into the tapestry of our faiths. The horrendous thought of being consumed, of succumbing to inscrutable forces that dwell beyond the veil of our comprehension. This idea seems to resonate within the darkest corners of the human mind and even within our very souls. Within this pitch-black realm, a profound event unfolds involving a young woman, and what occurs would blur the delicate boundary between the world of the supernatural and the tangible, scaring the curious minds of those who experienced it, causing them to ponder if there certainly is a devil that lurks within the darkness. So join me as I explore the untold story of the terrifying exorcism of Martha Brosier, which took place in the 16th century in France. The mid-1550s, a time fraught with prevalent superstitions and deep-seated fears of witches and demons, creatures that hovered over mankind as menacing threats. A young woman named Martha Brosier, also known as Martha Brosier, emerged as a mysterious figure in an era characterized by the realms of black magic and the supernatural. Initially perceived as an unremarkable individual, she was merely seen as an eccentric girl, often keeping to herself, avoiding her neighbors, and preferring her own company. However, this unassuming, shy facade was shattered one rainy night. Martha, 20 years old at the time, had began to act exceptionally strange weeks prior to this night, drawing further and further into herself. She began to seem oppressed by something that she couldn't see, often being attacked or harassed at night. This night in particular, however, something very different took place. The petite woman, as lightning crashed and rain pelted the outside walls of her home, unleashed a bone-chilling, demonic howl. This alerted her parents, who ran to see just what was happening. Upon opening the door to her room, they found their daughter perched in the corner of her room, upon her nightstand, contorted, her limbs twisting in unnatural directions. She then again opened her mouth and screeched, her god-awful screams being so loud that they even pierced the ears of nearby neighbors through the chaos of the storm. Little did the family realize that night that this event would reverberate throughout the tumultuous year of 1576. Word spread like wildfire, and with the heavily religious lives of most Europeans at that time, these rumored otherworldly screams soon sparked immediate suspicion. Suspicion that the young woman could have perhaps been involved in witchcraft, that the devil had made his way inside Martha Brosier. The out-of-the-blue emergence of Martha's inexplicable behavior soon cast a sinister shadow over her neighbor, a woman named Anne Chevreau. Suddenly, this calm and relatively charming woman found herself unjustly accused of bewitching Martha. Soon the accusations spiraled into a web of superstition, and this paranoia would ultimately lead to Anne's imprisonment. She would be charged with the crime of practicing sorcery, a grim fate sealed by the village folk, whose fear seemed to further taint the air with an aura of malevolence and terror. The bizarre behavior of Martha, which had begun to escalate that rainy night in her room just weeks before, had seemed to only get worse. Alongside screaming in dual octaves and contorting into abhorrent, twisted positions, she began manifesting violent outbursts. She would try and attack anyone and everyone near her, even while contorted. Her teeth would gnash. Her voice emitted insults in a deep and guttural tone, as if several men were attempting to speak through her at once. Alongside this, blood-curdling screams occasionally burst from her. She began to roll her eyes into the back of her skull. She would extend her tongue to inhuman lengths, often biting in and laughing. She would also begin to converse in unfamiliar languages she couldn't have possibly known. These included English and Greek, alongside her native French. And even more disturbingly, she could speak these languages with her mouth closed, as if Martha was being used as a puppet. And alongside all of these unnatural symptoms, she also would boastfully move items without touching them, and when assaulting people or fighting restraints, she would show extraordinary strength, often taking multiple men to hold her down, and not without great struggle. As word spread about Martha, whispers of her alleged possession by demons, or even the devil himself, began to circulate, and in a surprising and extremely odd move, instead of recoiling in fear, her family embarked on a unique journey with Martha. They transformed her affliction into a macabre spectacle. They began traveling with her village to village to showcase the possessed woman they all kept hearing about, in all of her grotesque glory. The alleged entity that inhabited Martha began to induce convulsions, terrifying roars, and a series of otherworldly displays that left spectators both mesmerized and petrified. The bizarre nature of her manifestations, including her ability to speak with a sealed mouth, extending her tongue to unnatural lengths, contorting her body in unimaginable ways, and exhibiting superhuman leaps even while lying down, defied logical explanation and solidified her reputation as a genuine supernatural enigma. This spectacle drew increasingly larger crowds, propelling Martha into celebrity status. King Henry IV was not merely informed of these freakish displays and rumors, but rather he received a detailed account of Martha's manifestations and the growing whispers of alleged demonic possession that surrounded her. Intrigued by the escalating tales of the tormented girl, the king took decisive action and issued a royal decree for an exorcism. This decree set into motion a chain of events that led to Martha being escorted to the hallowed grounds of the Abbey of Saint Genesu, where a sense of anticipation and apprehension hung heavy in the air. It's important to note that I couldn't find information on any prior exorcisms, but rather, her family seemed to be profiting off of her spiritual dilemma. like a deformed creature at some kind of carnival or circus. Awaiting Martha's arrival at the abbey was the eminent Bishop of Paris, a figure of authority and piety, who stood ready to confront the story that had captured the attention of the entire kingdom. Accompanying the bishop was none other than the king's personal physician, Michel Marescot, a man whose skepticism towards the supernatural was well known. However, as Martha's case unfolded before him, Marescot found himself embroiled in a unique experiment that would test the very boundaries of his beliefs and challenge the established notions of demonic possession. For Marescot, this extraordinary situation presented an unparalleled opportunity to delve into the realms of the unknown, a chance to scrutinize the phenomena of possession with a keen eye for scientific inquiry. This exorcism, unlike any before it, became a crucible of investigation, where each detail, each reaction, and each utterance were meticulously observed and analyzed. As Martha stood on the precipice between the earthly and the ethereal, Marescot found himself at the forefront of a groundbreaking study that would ignite debates and discussions for years to come. The results of this unprecedented exorcism were not merely contentious, they became a focal point of scholarly discourse and theological deliberation, shaping the very fabric of beliefs and superstitions that permeated society. The revelations that emerged from this bizarre event continue to echo through the halls of history, leaving a lingering mystery that defies easy explanation and challenges the perceptions of those who bore witness to Martha's ordeal. The physician, driven by his growing suspicions, meticulously orchestrated a covert plan to validate his doubts. With the utmost secrecy, he carried out a daring swap, exchanging the sacred relic, believed to be a piece of the true cross, with a piece of mundane wood. This strategic maneuver aimed to unravel the tale surrounding Martha's eerie episodes and delve into the depths of her unsettling manifestations. Upon Martha's arrival at the solemn abbey and the subsequent confrontation with the bishop, the stage was set for a dramatic unfolding of events. As anticipated, with the presentation of holy objects, Martha's demeanor swiftly transformed. In the blink of an eye, she plunged into a tumultuous whirlwind of violence. Her rageful movements shook the very foundations of the abbey. The contorted form of her body convulsed as she unleashed a torrent of vile and profane utterances in multiple languages and in that horrible, deep tonality, each syllable dripping with an ominous malevolence. The priests, taken aback by the chilling display before them, struggled to contain Martha, resorting to allegedly using a piece of the real true cross to subdue her erratic behavior, to essentially drive the demonic entities back to the point where she could be restrained. Yet after this occurred, the situation escalated once more to full-blown intensity, objects hurling about as screams echoed. Once again, amidst the chaos, the alleged piece of the true cross was brought near Martha, and this triggered another visceral reaction, one that sent shivers throughout the witnesses. As the relic touched her, Martha recoiled in sheer terror, her face wincing in agony. Whilst being restrained and having the demon commanded to leave her body, a powerful and final scream came from her lips. She then fell limp. Upon regaining consciousness, Tears began streaming down Martha's face. She was seemingly freed from the evil that had taken her. Those who witnessed the events were forever scarred by what they had seen. It was as if they had looked into the eyes of the devil himself. While the bishop interpreted this harrowing scene as conclusive evidence of demonic possession, skepticism loomed in the mind of the astute Mariscott. His analytical gaze honed in on the discrepancy and the pieces of the cross that were presented to Martha, and how she had reacted to the swapped items. She had interestingly seemed to have a much more profound reaction to the decoy cross than that of the true cross. This perplexing disparity fueled Mariscott's doubts, prompting a deeper introspection into the complexities of the woman's affliction and the underlying forces at play. The intricate interplay of faith, skepticism, and the supernatural unfolded within the hollowed walls of the abbey, setting the stage for a riveting clash of beliefs and interpretations as the veil of uncertainty shrouded Martha's condition. The physician's clandestine experiment sparked a contentious debate that reverberated through the corridors of power and piety. Amidst the lingering cries of doubt and conviction, the true nature of Martha's plight remained veiled in mystery, awaiting further revelation as to what indeed had taken place that night. Mariscott informed the bishop and other priests about his actions, stating that Martha's condition might be due to severe mental distress rather than possession. He considered this as evidence that there was no demonic influence involved. Despite Mariscott's belief, the bishop adamantly maintained that Martha was under demonic possession, going to the extent of accusing the physician of blasphemy for suggesting otherwise, another horrible charge that carried heavy consequences for that time. The debate raged on, and consequently, although Mariscott held strong suspicions that Martha's affliction was either a charade or a result of mental instability, he struggled to sway the church's opinion. Thus, the experiment at this juncture faced a setback in achieving its intended outcome. Despite the outcome, Mariscott in the coming months would find unexpected allies in his beliefs within the church, unbeknownst to him. The Archbishop of Lyon, Charles Miron, shared Mariscott's conviction and chose to push the boundaries of the experiment further, devised an elaborate plan to test his suspicions by concealing a key in red silk and presenting it to Martha as a fragment of the true cross. Additionally, he proposed swapping holy water with regular water to observe her reactions. Adding to the intrigue, he recited passages from Virgil's Aeneid in Latin, intended to be nonsensical to a demon, but potentially misconstrued as potent scripture by an ordinary individual. In essence, the entire exorcism would be a meticulously orchestrated charade. Martha stood before the Archbishop, her body racked by spasmodic convulsions that seemed to ripple through her, being like violent tremors. As she stood in his presence, a sense of foreboding hung heavy in the air, shrouding the room in silence. Unbeknownst to Martha, a small vial of holy water was discreetly offered to her trembling hand, its sanctified essence shimmering faintly in the dim light of the chamber. With a trembling grasp, she ingested the holy water, her movements almost mechanical in their desperation for solace. However, the fateful moment arrived when a seemingly identical vial of water, carefully disguised as holy water, was presented to Martha. As the liquid touched her lips, a primal scream tore through the stillness of the room. reverberating with a raw agony that seemed to sear her very soul. The Archbishop, his gaze now piercing and unwavering, observed these events, his mind a maelstrom of conflicting thoughts and conjecture. Why did the ordinary water evoke such visceral distress, while the holy water remained untouched by the flames of her torment? What sinister forces lurked beneath the surface of Martha? Did they weave a web of fear and uncertainty around her very being? Moreover, the moment of truth arrived, as a relic resembling a fragment of the revered True Cross was presented to Martha. The mere sight of this sacred object triggered a reaction so intense that it laid bare the depths of her inner turmoil with a stark clarity that sent terror through the hearts of those present. From here, the verses were read. Martha's reaction mirrored her encounter with the deceptive waters, blurring the lines between the sacred and the profane in a dance of otherworldly revelation. In the wake of these unexplainable events, Archbishop Miron found himself standing at the crossroads of disbelief and conviction, his resolve tested by the inexplicable nature of Martha's responses, the intricate puzzle of her reactions to seemingly mundane stimuli raised questions that transcended the boundaries of the natural world, hinting at a presence that defied conventional explanation. As the Archbishop delved deeper into the labyrinth of Martha's eerie manifestations, a cold realization began to dawn upon him. The revelations unearthed in the crucible of faith and skepticism marked a watershed moment where the veil of alleged demonic possession was lifted to reveal a complex framework of human frailty or deception. The implications of this groundbreaking revelation resonated far beyond the confines of the Abbey, challenging the very fabric of beliefs that had held sway over the minds of the faithful for centuries. Despite the apparent conclusion and the suggestion that Martha Brosier might have been a mere fraud, a charlatan, or possibly not completely sound of mind, her case still continued to stir controversy. Numerous witnesses attested to witnessing her bizarre episodes firsthand, insisting that her actions surpassed human capabilities, making it implausible for her to fabricate everything. Brosier herself maintained her assertion of being possessed, and would ultimately persist in her tours until her death. Now, before we go, the twists and turns of this case have turned up many questions. It's my conviction that this particular case could have influenced the Catholic Church all the way to the modern day, because nowadays, a person must be examined by a doctor as well as a psychologist before an exorcism can even be considered. Could Martha's case have caused this? All around pretty interesting in my opinion. If the young woman was possessed, just how did this occur? Was she cursed, bewitched by someone else? Or was she herself dabbling with the dark arts? Despite her anguish and apparent pain, her family took her around like a traveling circus act, and no doubt profited from the spectacle. This to me is obscene if she indeed was under demonic influence. To think that her own flesh and blood could be so exploitative is just heartbreaking, unless she was in on it. After word got out and she was properly exorcised on the king's orders, just how or why would she show aversion to non-holy relics, such as the piece of wood resembling the true cross or the non-blessed water? And lastly, if she was seemingly freed during this event, why did she then return to touring as the possessed woman after the debacle? To me, this makes me question whether she was a charlatan or a fake. or perhaps someone who was very mentally disturbed, or sick with some kind of illness that was unknown to physicians at the time, or if she was truly possessed. In possession, like most paranormal things, we can never fully grasp. The truth is up to you to decide. Was the devil in the darkness, or was he unmasked to reveal a very clever woman just trying to make a living through strange means? Can a toy be haunted, let alone cause harm to anyone who comes into contact with it or views its image? With seemingly unknown origins, but possessing an energy that radiates pure evil, the item, specifically the doll that we will be discussing today, is rumored to be able to not only affect people who come into contact with it in the flesh, but to even have the ability to reach you through the screens of your device. So if this is something you fear, a risk you potentially don't want to take, then I highly suggest you find another video to watch. This is the untold story of Peggy the doll and the malevolent presence that surrounds it. If you enjoy my content, then I know you'll enjoy a very similar style over at the Missing Chapter. This video was made possible by Bob Hicks and his amazing research and studio, which I used while visiting. Every case is unique and covered in an incredible style that makes the channel fantastic. So please, take a few moments to go and check out his content. There is only so much information available on this particular case. All information has been researched using a variety of sources, including books, websites, and first-hand accounts. Please be aware that some names have been changed to protect the identity of those involved, and with such little information found, I have done my best to form the most cohesive story possible. I would also like to warn you that supposedly, viewing photos of Peggy or videos have caused distress, physical issues, and more. Shrouded in mysterious allure, the toy known as Peggy the doll is said to house an otherworldly essence that radiates a profound feeling of evil, intertwined with chilling terrors that have ensnared the collective curiosity of the public. Believed to be in a perpetual state of unrest, it has captivated the minds of many since its initial discovery, now 9 years ago. The true origin of Peggy is unknown, but the world became aware of its existence in 2015. This very year, a woman who wishes for her identity to remain anonymous had been out at a local garage sale in her area in search of something cool to take home at a fair price. As she perused the various bins sat upon tables, seeing if anything interested her, out of the corner of her eye, she spotted an adorable-looking doll with blonde hair, beaded blue eyes, and a small white dress adorning her. Feeling some kind of pull towards the doll, and feeling as if she would enjoy the presence of a new companion, she quickly purchased the toy that in due time she would start calling Peggy. But almost as soon as Peggy entered her life and was placed inside of her home, strange things began to happen. The woman began to have horrendous nightmares every single night, ones that were so bad that when she woke up, she'd be laying in a pool of her own sweat, unable to catch her breath. Day after day, the increasingly ominous empty gaze of Peggy stared into her soul, slowly but surely increasing her anxiety. And night after night, these horrendous nightmares would continue to induce terror. In a short period of time, the persistent force made the air so thick that you could cut it with a knife. Roughly 3 weeks upon the purchase of the doll and the start of the nightmares, the woman dreaded inevitably falling asleep each night. She had also come to the personal conclusion that something was indeed very wrong with Peggy. Each night, in her nightmares, she was being pursued by some kind of entity that for the longest time she was unable to see. And yet each night's sleep would mirror the last, and each one the story seemed to progress. Upon drifting off into dreamland, she would find herself back in the same terrifying circumstances in which she had been in previously, and what she saw was truly disturbing. Slowly, the entity that pursued her, which at first was masked by darkness, began to reveal itself. It formed a figure, the figure of a doll, and over time, the doll began to become a hideous amalgamation between that of a doll and an old woman, a grotesque monstrosity, one that would leave her shaking in utter distress. This shook this poor lady to her core, especially since she had never experienced anything like this before. Believing this to be a manifestation of evil, she tried various methods to quell the abyss that seemed to take such great interest in her. After Peggy entered her life, she tried moving the doll to various spots within her home, but that didn't seem to work. She consulted 2 priests at 2 different churches, both of whose blessings didn't seem to work. If anything, this seemed to make the circumstances so much worse. Peggy began to move around on her own, and in conjunction with this, she began breaking multiple items within the home as well. She finally, out of desperation, moved Peggy into her shed, hoping that with the doll being outside of the home, that her torment would cease. This, however, failed, and if anything, seemed to anger whatever entity was present. Seemingly exhausting all known options at the time, and out of desperation and hours of research, she found and emailed someone who she believed would be equipped to help her and or figure out just what was taking place. A renowned British paranormal investigator, a woman by the name of Jane Harris, who ran the organization Haunted Dolls. After a brief correspondence, Harris agreed to accept Peggy the doll, so it was placed in the post and mailed to her. But as the doll made its long journey to Harris's residence, little did she know that she too would become one of the entity's victims. The doll would arrive in a tan box upon Harris's doorstep roughly 3 weeks later. When she brought the box inside of her home, as soon as her foot crossed the threshold, she would later say that it was as if the whole energy seemed to shift within her house. As she unboxed the toy and presented it to the first rays of light it had seen in nearly a month, she almost immediately began the induction process. She set aside a space for Peggy and attempted to establish a baseline to see if anything abnormal seemed to be coming from the doll. Placing her within a glass stand, her and several of her colleagues began to set up night vision cameras, digital cameras, and motion detectors. After this was done, they examined it with an EMF meter, but nothing at first seemed to be odd about the doll, other than the feeling Harris had upon bringing it into her home. They left the doll for an overnight examination to see if any of their cameras or motion detectors picked up on anything, but after the first night, they would discover nothing. Despite the lack of findings, the team's protocol would dictate that the next step would be to bring in several mediums to try and see if they felt anything in regards to the object. This, however, takes time and schedule, so in the meantime, it would have to essentially sit on the back burner. It was now November of 2015, and approximately 6 weeks after Peggy the doll had arrived on the doorsteps of Jane Harris. Strangely, almost out of the blue, because she wasn't known to have issues like these before, Jane was suddenly hit with an unyielding, debilitating fatigue. Barely able to move, she remained bedridden for roughly 2 weeks, and that's when her body began to be racked with horrible migraines, accompanied with nausea. This would cause her to not only put a pause on her normal paranormal works, but she was also unable to care for her 2 young children. Despite getting 8 to 9 hours of solid sleep a night, plus naps due to the exhaustion, and suffering for several weeks, Harris's condition was not improving. 3 doctors had ran all sorts of tests, and yet nothing was coming back abnormal. Blood tests ruled out thyroid issues. She had no signs of anemia or any other kind of illness for that matter. Left with no other explanation, Jane had to consider the possibility, since it was the only factor that had recently changed in her life, that perhaps her ailed state was a result of the presence of Peggy the doll. Wanting an outside opinion, she decided to contact a friend and clairvoyant whom she had worked with on other cases, a medium named Patricia Redman. On November 13th, roughly a week after being asked, Patricia would agree to take and examine Peggy. And for the first time in over a month, Jane slowly but surely began to feel better. She wasn't drained of energy. Her constant migraines and nausea were gone, and her skin, which had taken quite the gray tone since she had fallen ill, began to go back to normal. Redman would have the doll for approximately 3 weeks and agreed to return it to Harris, but not before casting a spell of protection upon it, in hopes that if the doll was affecting her, that it would no longer bother her during her studies. Her conclusion, and strangely, what would become the conclusion of 3 other psychics over the course of the investigation, was that Peggy contained the spirit of a woman from London, England. It is thought that she is possessed by the spirit of a woman born in 1946 in London's Holland Park, who died of a chest-related condition, possibly an asthma attack. The readings would further uncover that the woman was persecuted and had a very hard life, that she disliked clowns and cats, and that she died horribly and alone of asphyxiation, cold, and by herself. Could this perhaps be why she was so angry in death? And why did she inhabit the doll to begin with? These questions perhaps will never be answered, or have yet to be uncovered. During the course of the investigation, through her social media for haunted dolls, Jane began to post updates regarding Peggy the doll, as she would with any of the items or other objects the group would be involved with. The photos and videos of Peggy began to draw visceral reactions from those who viewed them, in conjunction with strange manifestations of the paranormal. And not just a handful of people over the years. Hundreds have poured in, leading most to believe that there has to be some kind of correlation. These experiences people have had range from horrible headaches, anxiety, and nausea, to shortness of breath, abnormal heartbeat, and more. With others, their computers freezing upon the image of Peggy, light bulbs exploding, and in one instance, a candle falling over and causing a small fire. These are just some of the comments that have been said upon viewing the images and videos. Upon viewing the doll, I had a full-blown asthma attack, which hasn't occurred in almost a decade. R. Tromans. I've had a migraine and palpitations since seeing your doll. Please contact me. J. Claire. This is so strange. Can dogs and cats sense evil? Since I opened the photo of that doll, my little terrier, Molly, has been snarling and growling at the screen. I'm a bit freaked out. J. Carlton. One woman, upon viewing an image of Peggy, had a dream that some kind of figure was chasing her cat and eventually caught it as it was running up to her door. Upon waking up and going to check on her beloved pet, after not finding it within her home, she checked her front door and found the cat no longer alive. It was as if it had been mauled. Eventually, the doll would find a new home at the haunted museum owned by controversial paranormal investigator Zach Bagans. Here she resides in her own space, in a glass display, where people continue to experience strange feelings and occurrences as a result of being within her presence. But before we go, this case to me poses several questions which I'd like to address. First of which, if we take things at face value, if Peggy was possessed, why would the spirit choose to inhabit a doll, and then also cause so much torment? I found that if a spirit is restless and angry in life, then odds are they become lost souls when they die. They may seek something to inhabit that will allow them to gain access to people and or their homes, to which they can take out their frustration, just like people, which they were. If they're evil or angry in life, odds are they will be in death as well. Were the nightmares the result of an overactive imagination? It is pretty well known that some entities like to infiltrate dreams. Why this is a thing is uncertain, perhaps to cause distress in which they can feed upon. And what about the physical ailments? This perhaps could have been a coincidence if it hadn't affected so many people over the years, or so they claim. The odds that so many people would express physical issues or strange manifestations as a result of seeing or being in contact with the doll is indeed odd. And lastly, was it even a human spirit inhabiting the vessel at all, or perhaps something inhuman? These questions and more, of course, will likely never be able to answer, which leaves this case shrouded and yet more mystery. So if you find yourself being pulled towards a particular item, unless you are vastly experienced, you may want to give its allure a second thought, because this calling could potentially open up a nightmarish world of torment, harassment, and terror. During the 1980s, Houston, Texas, a city brimming with vibrancy, experienced a substantial increase in its population as new residents eagerly migrated to the region. To meet the demand generated by this population boom, there was a widespread construction effort focused on creating housing subdivisions in the areas surrounding the city. Among these newly minted neighborhoods stood the prestigious Newport subdivision, nestled on the fringes of Houston in Crosby, Texas. This distinguished community radiated elegance and refinement, showcasing splendid new homes and flawlessly groomed lawns, epitomizing the ultimate American dream in all of its glory. However, hidden beneath the gleaming exterior of this prosperous sanctuary of peaceful suburban life, mysterious secrets and intense supernatural forces were quietly at play. This is the untold story of the haunting of Black Hope Cemetery. Hey everyone, as many of you know, I finally took the leap of faith and I'm now making content full-time to support my family. This is truly a dream come true, but I need your support now more than ever. So I'm asking, if you want to enjoy my content ad-free and enable me to do more stuff for you guys, please check out my Patreon and YouTube membership programs. And thank you for watching Mystery Archives. Among the earliest settlers in the just-developed Newport subdivision were Sam and Judith Haney, who, in 1982, claimed their dream residence. Initially, their joy knew no bounds, for they had acquired the home they had long envisioned for themselves, blissfully unaware of the dark secrets that lurked beneath its surface. However, their contentment began to unravel when they opted to add a swimming pool to their property. As the construction team set about the preliminary work for the pool, an unexpected and rather eerie visitation occurred. An aged gentleman, introducing himself as Jasper Norton, approached them with a bone-chilling warning. He insisted that beneath the very spot where they had planned to construct their pool lay hidden graves, advising against the continuation of their project. Reflecting on this peculiar and unsettling encounter, Sam Haney recounted, "One day, an elderly gentleman approached me, noting that he had seen us planning to install a swimming pool in our backyard. He mentioned that there was something important about our backyard that I needed to know. Curious, I followed him around back, where he pointed to the ground and ominously announced that there were some graves beneath us. He even went as far to mark the exact location of these alleged graves. I didn't know what to make of this information. The possibility that he was making up this story crossed my mind, but I was as puzzled to why anyone would invent such a disturbing tale." Norton proceeded to share a haunting revelation, He personally had buried the bodies at that very location during his teenage years. He divulged to the Haneys, who were oblivious to the fact that their land, their subdivision, stood on what used to be a cemetery, primarily for African American former slaves. This burial ground was known as Black Hope Cemetery, with its final interment dating back to 1939. Norton claimed there remained no fewer than 60 indigent graves scattered across the vicinity, over which the housing subdivision was constructed. The developers, in their haste, had built directly atop the old cemetery, neglecting to relocate the bodies, effectively erasing any trace of the cemetery's existence under layers of new construction and collective amnesia. Despite the eerie nature of Norton's tale, it barely shook Haney's skepticism towards these ghostly narratives. However, driven by a blend of curiosity and a need for certainty, Haney took it upon himself to verify Norton's claims. Armed with a shovel, he began to excavate the area Norton had marked, soon to discover that the chilling stories were rooted in a grim reality, far surpassing mere folklore. As Haney began digging, his shovel struck an unexpected wooden resistance beneath the earth. It wasn't long before he and his wife uncovered two antiquated wooden coffins, cradling the skeletal remains of individuals long past, one of whom was adorned with two wedding bands, silently narrating a tale of eternal union, even in death. The discovery prompted an urgent call to the authorities, who, after delving into historical records, unveiled that the unearthed remains were those of Betty and Charles Thomas, two individuals who had lived their lives as freed slaves, their earthly journeys concluding in the 1930s. The revelation that they had inadvertently disturbed these resting souls left the couple deeply unsettled, prompting them to tenderly re-enter the remains in their original resting places. However, unbeknownst to them and the myriad of families who had made their homes in this seemingly serene locale, this act would unfurl the curtain to a series of eerie, unexplained occurrences, ensnaring the entire subdivision in a web of spectral happenings. The strange occurrences for the Haney family commenced shortly after they had respectfully reburied two unearthed bodies. Judith Haney experienced a peculiar incident when she observed their wall clock emitting a blue glow and producing unusual sparks. The situation made even more bizarre upon discovering that it had been disconnected from its power source. Following this, Judith encountered additional eerie phenomena, such as an unsettling feeling of being watched, and the sound of the sliding door opening and shutting when she was certain that she was alone in the house. In another bewildering event, Judith sought her red shoes from the closet, only to find them missing. Despite an exhaustive search by the couple, the shoes were eventually located in the most unexpected place imaginable, resting atop the graves they had recently disturbed. Adding to the eeriness, they would later ascertain that the day coincided with Betty Thomas's birthday. Sam shared his reflections on the odd occurrence. Struggling to believe what was happening, I went through every spot she usually kept her things, but the shoes were nowhere to be found. It was only when we got away from the graves that I noticed something on the top of the grave. The shoes were neatly placed next to one another, almost as if someone had intentionally carried them over. This gave me a strong feeling that this was some kind of message or symbolic act. It felt like, in a very mystical way, Charlie was giving Betty a birthday present. A thought that stayed with me for its unique kind of sweetness. During this time, The phenomenon wasn't limited to the Haney family. It had begun to permeate throughout the neighborhood, touching the lives of other residents as well. Among them were Ben and Jean Williams, a couple residing nearby, who found themselves embroiled in their own unsettling mystery. They observed a perplexing and continuous demise of the flowers in their garden, which withered away inexplicably, immune to any efforts of revival. Adding to the mystery, their property became the site of coffin-shaped sinkholes that, despite numerous attempts to fill them, would ominously re-emerge, as if refusing to be erased. Their home turned into a hotbed for a spectrum of terrifying occurrences, weaving a tapestry of the paranormal that was both intriguing and unnerving. The ambiance of their household was occasionally sliced by inexplicable cold drafts, chilling to the bone even on the warmest of summer days, creating a stark contrast to the outside world. Plumbing fixtures seemed to develop a life of their own, with faucets and toilets operating independently of human intervention. The silence of their home was often broken by the sound of footsteps echoing through the corridors, absent of any physical presence to account for them. Doors would swing open and slam shut, untouched by human hands, while ethereal, shadowy figures darted out of the corner of their eyes, only to vanish when faced directly. The air was occasionally filled with the murmur of disembodied voices, whispering secrets from beyond, and on occasion, a foul, unexplainable stench would sometimes invade their space, only to dissipate as mysteriously as it had appeared. All these phenomena culminated in a pervasive atmosphere of dread and unease that hung over their home like a dense fog, a constant reminder of the unseen and unfathomable forces at play. Jean later expressed her firm belief in the connection between their experiences and the historical backdrop of their home, stating that, "I absolutely believe that all of these things happened to us because we were on that graveyard, and that we were simply going to be tormented until we left." The possibility of relocating was a topic of conversation, yet the financial constraint of affording a new place tethered them to their current predicament, compelling them to endure and seek solutions amidst the growing displeasure of the entities haunting them. As the intensity and malevolence of the occurrences escalated, Ben Williams recounted one particularly harrowing episode with vivid detail. Returning home well past midnight from my shift, I made a beeline for the kitchen, craving a late-night snack. The moment I swung the refrigerator door open, I was met with the startling sight of two spectral figures. They glided backward into the den with an eerie grace before making their way to the hallway towards Jean's room. One of them lingered menacingly close to the bed, barely more than a foot away. A protective instinct surged through me, driven by the thought, they ain't messing with me and my wife. And with that, I charged through the apparition. A chilling, vicious cold seeped deep into my very bones as a result. Upon uncovering the unsettling truth that their property was established atop an old cemetery, the Williams family grew increasingly suspicious of an ancient oak tree in their backyard. This tree, distinguished by its twisted form and bearing carvings of an arrow accompanied by several lines, soon took on a sinister significance. Initially overlooked, these markings now seemed to ominously suggest that the tree served as a marker for a grave. This revelation cast a shadow over their perception of their home, transforming the once innocuous tree into a symbol of the land's grim history. Compelled by a sense of injustice, the Williamses decided to take legal action against the developers of their housing estate. They accused the developers of egregiously omitting to inform them that their dream home was erected on what used to be a graveyard. However, their legal challenge hit a roadblock when they were informed that their case would only hold water if they could conclusively prove the presence of graves on their property. Undeterred, Ben, alongside his wife and their daughter Tina, embarked on a mission to excavate the area surrounding the foreboding oak tree. They were driven by a firm belief that they would uncover human remains, thereby substantiating their claims. However, as they dug deeper, both Jean and Tina were suddenly afflicted by a mysterious illness, the cause of which eluded understanding. The situation took a dire turn when Tina was rushed to the hospital, only to succumb to a severe heart attack. Convinced that these tragic events were the cause of malevolent forces linked to the desecrated burial ground, the Williams family made the difficult decision to leave behind their haunted home. Seeking solace and a fresh start, they relocated to Montana. But the memories of their harrowing experiences lingered, compelling them to eventually return to Texas, where they channeled their ordeal into a book titled The Black Hope Horror, a detailed account of their supernatural encounters. Their story captured the public's imagination to such an extent that it was adapted into a film known as The Grave Secrets, bringing their chilling experiences to a wider audience and immortalizing the haunting legacy of their former home. The Haneys decided to pursue legal recourse against the developers, seeking justice for their unsettling ordeal. Initially, their efforts appeared to bear fruit when they were granted a substantial financial compensation of $142,000. However, this moment of victory was short-lived. In a surprising turn of events, the verdict was reversed after a judge concluded that the developer was not at fault. Consequently, the Haneys found themselves burdened with a significant amount of legal expenses, running into tens of thousands of dollars. This financial strain left them with no choice other than to declare bankruptcy. Devoid of any financial resources, they were compelled to leave behind the land that had turned their aspirations into a harrowing nightmare. Their pursuit of the American dream had tragically metamorphosized into a devastating ordeal, leaving them drained of their savings and facing a future filled with uncertainty. It appears that the series of peculiar events linked to this land didn't conclude here, however. Despite reports from the current occupants of the Haneys' previous residence indicate no unusual experiences, tales of the bizarre continue to circulate among other households in the vicinity. In an intriguing account from a resident now living in what once was the Williams home, she describes an eerie incident involving a sound resembling that of a cougar emanating from outside her window. However, upon investigation, she found nothing that could explain the mysterious noise. Meanwhile, a few houses away, occupants have reported experiencing unexplained electrical anomalies, adding an element of the unordinary to their daily lives. Another neighbor has shared tales of doors slamming shut without any apparent cause, such as drafts or wind, and even recounting the feeling that seemed like an invisible hand had been resting on their shoulder. And further adding to the collection of mystifying stories, Jan Clark, the mother of one home's owner, relayed her granddaughter's unsettling experiences. The young girl claimed to have seen a shadowy figure she referred to as the Brown Man in her room, and recounted another peculiar incident, all of which contribute to the ongoing mystery surrounding this neighborhood. Another time, I had gone to the restroom with my granddaughter, Taylor. She had run out, leaving me in the restroom alone, and something like a man's voice breathed, really heavy and really close to me. I got out of there, and quick, and to this day, I try not to go back in there and use that restroom anymore. There is something to this. Some people won't talk about it because they don't want to be considered crazy, or they just don't care to know the truth. Another nearby family would also share their eerie experiences. Vinay Luna, who recounts multiple unexplained events in their home. Among these, she vividly remembers an incident where her husband's slippers leapt from his grip. In an even more startling moment, when their pet dog appeared to be suspended mid-air. Moreover, Vinay reveals that her grandmother has encountered mysterious figures within the home. She elaborates on her grandmother's experiences by saying, "My grandma consistently tells us about a shadowy man who visits her, for reasons unknown. Then, there are times she talks about children's presences in her room, which prevent her from getting any rest because of their continuous disturbances." In contrast, there are households in the area that report a complete absence of any peculiar activities, presenting a stark difference to the accounts of paranormal encounters and leaving the community puzzled over the true nature of this phenomenon. It's undeniable that this location was once a cemetery, a fact overlooked or even ignored by the developers when they transformed it into a residential area. And this raises several critical questions. Could the ghostly occurrences reported by the residents be a direct consequence of the disturbed spirits due to the desecration of their final resting places? Is it possible that these souls are expressing their unrest or even anger towards the violation of their graves? The true cause remains shrouded in enigma, yet it underscores a crucial consideration for future developments: the importance of respecting burial grounds by ensuring the proper relocation of remains before proceeding with construction. This principle not only honors those who have passed, but also may prevent the unfolding of such mysterious and unsettling events. In the serene suburb of Seaford, New York, the Herman family's dreamy life is upended as their ordinary home becomes the epicenter of an extraordinary poltergeist phenomenon. With no prior history of hauntings or misfortune, their residence suddenly erupts with unexplained activities, bottles popping open, objects moving on their own, and an eerie sense of an unseen presence. Despite skepticism and attempts to find rational explanations, the events transcend understanding, drawing the attention of paranormal experts, the media, and a curious public. This is the untold story of Popper the Poltergeist of New York. Tucked away in the peaceful surroundings of Long Island is Seaford, New York, a place of subtle beauty and calm where the 1950s depicted an image of suburban peace. It was in this heavenly setting that James Herman created a tranquil life with his wife, Lucille, and their two children, Lucille, aged 13, and James, a year younger, at 12. Their home, a simple ranch painted in shades of white and green, served as a symbol of the typical American dream, with 3 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and straightforward simplicity. There was little to indicate it was any different from the other homes in the charming neighborhood, all of which were graced with the picturesque allure of tree-lined streets. Yet, beneath the surface of normality, a sense of mystery persisted. The Herman residence, with no dark history or stories of bad luck, was for some reason on the brink of becoming the center of a paranormal happening. This unassuming house against the calm backdrop of Seaford streets was about to inscribe its name in the halls of the supernatural. For unknown reasons, it was fated to be the site of a poltergeist phenomena, one that was so distinctive and captivating that its tale would be forever intertwined with the paranormal realm, casting a veil of fascination over the once peaceful existence of the Herman family. And seemingly out of the blue, things began to happen on February the 3rd of 1958. Until this point, the Herman family had not encountered anything out of the ordinary within their home. However, on this day, while Lucille was in the kitchen accompanied by her 2 children, an uncanny phenomenon unfolded before their very eyes. Bottles scattered throughout their kitchen, without any apparent cause, began to spontaneously unseal themselves. The caps were forcibly ejected, resulting in their contents erupting and spraying across the room, each bottle cap producing a distinct and resounding pop as it flew off. Some of the bottles allegedly engaged in an eerie dance, moving about with no visible support, a sight that understandably terrified them all. When James Herman walked through the door of his home, he was immediately confronted with the confounding narrative of the day's events. Carrying a deep-seated skepticism, James entertained the possibility that the curious happenings might be the result of natural environmental fluctuations, perhaps a significant rise in humidity levels, or an unforeseen chemical reaction within the confines of the bottles themselves. Such hypotheses briefly offered a comforting veil of normalcy over the situation. Yet, this semblance of explanation rapidly disintegrated as the full scope of the phenomena revealed itself to be far-reaching, indiscriminately affecting almost every container in the kitchen. Notably, even bottles secured with screw-on caps, which under normal circumstances would require human intervention to open, had mysteriously unscrewed themselves. The entire scene defied logic, standing in stark contrast to the mundane reality James had expected to return to. A mere 2 days after this bewildering introduction, the bizarre occurrences not only persisted, but escalated, casting a wider net over the household's collection of containers. This time, the activity was not limited to the kitchen or to a specific type of bottle. Jars of all sizes, bottles brimming with a variety of household liquids, such as shampoo, bleach, and even luxurious perfumes, alongside tubes of toothpaste, began to manifest the same inexplicable behavior that had initially perplexed the Herman family. Each container, as if acting on an unseen cue, would suddenly and violently burst open. Their contents, once neatly contained, were now subjects of an uncontrollable frenzy, spilling, spraying, and splattering across the room without any apparent trigger or discernible pattern. The randomness of the incidents only deepened the mystery, as did the diversity of the containers involved. Glass and plastic bottles alike, regardless of their contents, viscosity, or the container's design, were equally susceptible to this unseen force. The phenomena seemed to mock the very laws of physics, with caps and lids that should have remained securely fastened, instead becoming agents of chaos. The scene within the Herman household transformed from one of domestic tranquility to a bewildering spectacle of uncontrolled disarray, leaving the family and eventually the wider community grappling for explanations in the face of such unfathomable occurrences. As time went on, the mysterious events escalated in intensity, co-founding the Herman family and leaving the wider community searching for logical reasons. These occurrences baffled all attempts at rational explanation, with comprehensive investigations yielding no satisfactory scientific or environmental understanding. This sequence of bewildering events signaled the start of an exceptionally captivating and perplexing episode in the realm of paranormal mysteries, positioning the Herman household at the heart of it all. James Herman, as mentioned before, was inherently skeptical by nature, always seeking a logical explanation for the unexplained. He was not one to hastily attribute events to paranormal activities. When the peculiar happenings first began to unfold within their household, his mind gravitated towards a more earthly explanation. He pondered whether his son Jimmy, with a youthful penchant for mischief, might have devised an elaborate prank, potentially using carbonated capsules or some other mechanism to cause the bottles to spontaneously erupt. With this theory in mind, James embarked on a discreet observation of Jimmy, scrutinizing his every move in search of any hint of evidence that might link him to the strange occurrences. However, despite his vigilant watch over the boy, James uncovered not a shred of evidence implicating Jimmy in the bizarre events. Meanwhile, the mystery within the Herman household deepened. The phenomena escalated in intensity and variety, transcending beyond mere bottles. It seemed as though every manner of container within their home was susceptible to this force. Bottles of all types would burst open without warning, their contents propelled across the room in a chaotic display, each eruption accompanied by a distinct, crisp popping sound that had become all too familiar to the now bewildered family. However, the disconcerting phenomena within the Herman home extended beyond the peculiar antics of their containers. The family began to observe a bewildering array of household items, seemingly taking on a life of their own, as if manipulated by something they couldn't see. Toys and books, even larger pieces of furniture, began to exhibit this kind of strange behavior. Chairs that had been stationary for years suddenly skidded across the floor, tables tilted without warning, spilling their contents, and doors slammed shut with no one near them. Among the smaller objects, dolls were found in different rooms from where they had been left, as though they had moved by their own accord. Books would not only fall from shelves, but sometimes would fly across the room, as if thrown by something or someone. Picture frames that had hung peacefully on walls for years would suddenly crash to the floor in the middle of the night, their glass shattering, again without any discernible cause. The velocity which these objects moved was astonishing. On several occasions, toys rocketed from one end of the room to the other, often narrowly missing family members as they passed. Furniture that required the strength of two adults to move would slide or even lift and then crash back down with significant force, leaving indents in the hardwood floors or marks on the walls. The impact of these movements was so intense that it not only caused physical damage to the structure of the home, but also left emotional scars on the family, who were increasingly frightened by these occurrences. This escalation of activity heightened the atmosphere of tension and disbelief within the household. The Hermans, already struggling to comprehend the mysterious behavior of the containers, were now faced with a broader, more intense range of disturbances. These events seemed to defy all logic, suggesting that the presence of an invisible hand was guiding the chaos. The force and precision in which these items moved suggested something more than a mere coincidence or natural forces being at play. instilling a deep sense of unease and apprehension among the family members as they pondered the source and intent behind these manifestations. James, still clinging to a sliver of doubt about the paranormal nature of these events, decided to confront Jimmy directly, hoping to glean some confession or explanation from him. However, Jimmy vehemently denied any involvement. It was during this tense confrontation that an incident occurred, which shook James's skepticism to its core. Mid-conversation, a bottle that had been sitting idle on the shelf began to tremble before gliding across the surface. And then, with the now familiar popping sound, its cap flew off right before their eyes. This event, witnessed firsthand by both James and Jimmy, served as a stark indication that the situation was far more complex and inexplicable than James had originally conceived. It was a moment that marked a turning point, compelling James to reconsider his stance on the possibility of paranormal involvement and the disturbances that had been plaguing their home. Perplexed by this point and desperate for answers, James reached out to the local police department. His call was met with skepticism, yet the gravity of his plea convinced them to dispatch an investigator to the scene. The officer assigned to the case was James Hughes, a man known for his pragmatic approach and skeptical outlook on anything that veered into the realm of the supernatural. Upon entering the Herman residence, Hughes' skepticism was put to an immediate test as he witnessed an extraordinary spectacle himself. Bottles not only popped, but exploded as if charged with an unknown energy source, propelling shards of glass across the room like shrapnel. Hughes, though shaken, documented these occurrences meticulously, marking the beginning of an official inquiry into the strangeness. Following Hughes' initial observations, the case caught the attention of Detective Joseph Tozzi, a seasoned investigator with a keen interest in phenomena that defied easy explanation. Tozzi, determined to uncover the truth, orchestrated a comprehensive surveillance operation within the Herman home. Over several days and nights, Tozzi and his team kept a vigilant watch, documenting each incident with a rigor that bordered on the obsessive. The phenomena that they would observe was varied, but also similar to what had already taken place. Bottles previously at rest would suddenly animate, their contents frothing and spewing forth as if under pressure. And a particularly unnerving incident involved a bottle of perfume that, in full view of investigators, glided across the table with deliberate slowness before overturning to release its fragrant essence. Occasionally, bottle caps would detach and zip through the air with targeted precision, narrowly missing the observers and adding an element of personal threat to the occurrences. Tozzi noted that each object involved in these incidents, upon examination, radiated an abnormal warmth, as if it was infused with an unseen energy. The climax of Tozzi's observation came when a substantially heavy bureau desk, an object of considerable mass and unwieldy nature, abruptly flipped over on its own. The desk crashed to the floor with a thunderous impact, leaving the investigators bewildered and alarmed. This event was complemented by other startling manifestations. A figurine and a bowl were seen to launch across the room, as if propelled by this same force. Their trajectories seemed to be marked with intent to harm. Also, throughout this intensive period of observation, Tozzi made a curious observation that the presence of one of the Herman children seemed to be a common denominator in the timing of these phenomena. Yet, despite his exhaustive efforts to uncover any form of deception, no evidence of trickery or manipulation could be found. The meticulous documentation of these events coupled with the lack of any rational explanation, led Tootsie to a profound realization. The realization that what he had witnessed transcended the boundaries of conventional understanding, firmly planting the seed of belief in his mind that the disturbances at the Herman residence were indeed a manifestation of the unexplained. In their quest for solace, the Herman family sought the spiritual intervention of Father William MacLeod from the Church of St. William, the abbot. He visited their home and conducted a solemn ceremony infused with prayers and the sprinkling of holy water in every corner, hoping to cleanse the space of its unsettling disturbances. But despite Father MacLeod's honest efforts and the family's hopeful anticipation, the turmoil within the household persisted, as if the blessing had merely passed through an invisible barrier, leaving the chaos untouched. As the events within the Herman residence escalated, word of their plight began to seep into the public consciousness, igniting a wildfire of media interest. The story, sensationalized under the moniker of Popper the Poltergeist, a nod to the mysterious popping of bottles that had become a hallmark of the haunting, captured the imagination of the nation. Esteemed publications, such as Time and Life magazines, featured in-depth articles on the phenomenon, catapulting the Herman family into an unwelcome spotlight. This surge of attention drew a flood of curious onlookers, paranormal enthusiasts, and skeptics to their doorstep. Reporters and a motley crew of self-proclaimed experts besieged the once peaceful home. Letters, ranging from expressions of sympathy to outlandish theories, bombarded the family day and night. Amidst this chaotic intrusion, James Herman remained steadfast in his determination to unearth a logical explanation for the events that had disrupted their lives. In a bid to capture empirical evidence of the disturbances, he went to the extent of installing sophisticated monitoring equipment in the basement of their home. These devices, designed to detect even the slightest vibrations, he thought might help shed light on the source of the activity. But unfortunately, they would yield no conclusive findings, deepening the mystery rather than dispelling it. Journalists who ventured into the Herman residence, hoping to capture a glimpse of the supernatural, often left with more questions than answers. Many were first-hand witnesses to the bizarre occurrences that had become part of the daily fabric of the family's lives. In one particular startling incident, a reporter's camera became an unwilling participant in the phenomenon. The flashbulbs in his camera exploded as he prepared to document the scene, adding a tangible, albeit unnerving, dimension to his story. As time progressed, the enigma of the Herman household eventually attracted the attention of Robert Zeider, a physicist affiliated with Long Island's Brookhaven National Laboratory. Intrigued by the possibility of a scientific explanation, Zeider conducted an array of tests and analysis within the home. His investigations led him to theorize that the root of the disturbances might lie in the natural world, specifically the presence of underground streams beneath their property. He said that these hidden waterways could be generating an unusual magnetic field, a freak magnetic field that somehow triggered these unexplained activities. Despite the intriguing nature of his hypothesis, it did, however, offer little in the way of an immediate solace or solutions to the Herman family, who yet still remained ensnared in a web of mystery and public fascination. Perplexed by the ongoing mystery and at a loss for additional explanations, Detective Tootsie reached out to Dr. J.B. Rhine, a renowned expert from the parapsychology laboratory at Duke University in North Carolina, seeking insights into the baffling phenomena at the Herman residence. Dr. Rhine, along with his team, delved into the case, They would hypothesize that the source of the disturbances might be rooted in the psychic energy emanating from an individual within the household. Through careful observation and analysis, they identified Jimmy, the son, who was consistently present during these occurrences, as the likely epicenter of this psychic activity. To explore this theory further, Dr. Ryan introduced Dr. Pratt, a specialist in psychokinetic phenomena, into the equation. Dr. Pratt engaged Jimmy in a series of interactions, including conversations and recreational activities, in an effort to establish a rapport and observe any changes in the frequency or intensity of the paranormal events. Remarkably, it was noted that during these periods of engagement, the manifestations of the unexplained phenomena significantly diminished, suggesting a direct correlation between Jimmy's state of mind and the occurrences. This led the investigative team to a groundbreaking theory that Jimmy was unknowingly channeling his psychic energy in a way that manifested as the mysterious events that had been plaguing him and his family. They postulated that Jimmy was a conduit for recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, or better known as the acronym RSPK, a rare condition where an individual without conscious intent triggers paranormal activities through the sheer force of their subconscious mind. This involuntary projection of psychokinetic energy was believed to be the culprit behind this series of unexplained occurrences, and these findings were considered groundbreaking because it would prove that the Herman family wasn't the subject to trickery or the workings of an unknown supernatural entity. Instead, they represented a profound expression of human psychology, exceptional and remarkable in nature. The concept that the human brain could exert influence over physical objects without any tangible interaction was a radical departure from the established norms at the time. This perspective suggested that under certain conditions, perhaps related to emotional stress or psychological factors, that an individual could trigger manifestations of psychokinetic activity. And this theory poised that the mysterious occurrences within the Herman home, from the spontaneous popping of bottles to the unexplained movements of household items, could be directly linked to the subconscious outpourings of a young man's psychic energy. And although this seemed to be a pretty decent theory for explaining exactly what was taking place, things within the Herman household continued to unfold. An array of television crews managed to penetrate the once peaceful abode, their cameras ready to document the bewildering phenomena that had taken residence alongside the family. This pivotal moment in the saga of the Hermans not only brought the eerie disturbances into the living rooms of people across the country, but also set a precedent, marking the Popper incident as one of the first hauntings to ever be broadcast on national television. Audiences from coast to coast were drawn into the mystifying world of the Hermans, witnessing firsthand the unexplainable events that had disrupted their lives for years. Amid the whirlwind of attention, the Herman family found themselves longing for a semblance of normalcy. The constant presence of camera crews, the relentless scrutiny, and the unpredictable chaos that had become their daily lives left them yearning for the quiet, uneventful life they once knew. They sought solace in the hope that the mysterious disturbances that had thrust them into the spotlight would soon dissipate, allowing them to reclaim the peace that they had once had. Their hopes would not be in vain. A turn of events as sudden and unexplained as the onset of the disturbances. The strange happenings that had held the nation's attention came to an abrupt halt in August of 1958. The bottles ceased their spontaneous eruptions. The objects remained still, and the eerie atmosphere that had enveloped their home lifted, seemingly without reason or warning. The end of the disturbances was as much of a mystery as their beginning, leaving many to speculate on the forces that could bring about such cessation of activity. The ending of the haunting brought a profound sense of relief to the Herman family, who were finally able to turn the page on this bizarre chapter of their lives. However, the legacy of Pauper lived on, its mysteries unresolved, but forever etched into the halls of paranormal history. The unprecedented media coverage it had received had not only brought the phenomenon into public consciousness, but also had set a new standard for how such occurrences could be shared and analyzed on a national scale. The mystery of the Pauper poltergeist remains a source of enduring intrigue and fascination among paranormal experts, standing as a cryptic puzzle that continues to elude any form of definitive explanation. Such is the depth of the mystery that it prompted speculation among cultural historians and cinema scholars that the bizarre occurrences which had unfolded in the Herman household might have ignited the creative inspiration for the iconic film Poltergeist. This connection underscores the profound impact that the story has had, not with just the confines of the paranormal study, but also its influence on popular culture and cinematic storytelling. In conclusion, the mystery that is Pauper the Poltergeist not only remains a bizarre case that puzzles and fascinates us, but it also serves as a beacon, drawing attention to the vast, unexplored territories of human experience and the natural world. It challenges observers to question the limits of their understanding and to remain open to the possibilities that lie beyond the conventional frameworks of knowledge. The story of the Herman family and the inexplicable events that occurred within their home does stand as a testament to the enduring allure of the unknown and the perpetual quest for answers in the face of the inexplicable. In the midst of a lush, vibrant green expanse located in a quaint rural stretch of Essex, close to the eastern shores of England, there once resided an imposing, Gothic-inspired brick edifice known as Borley Rectory. This architectural marvel, erected in the year 1863 under the guidance of Reverend Henry Dawson Ellis Bull, soon became the cherished dwelling for him and his extensive family of 14. The plot of land upon which this rectory was constructed bore an enigmatic and lengthy history, stretching back well before its foundations were laid. Legend has it that this very site was once graced by a monastery in the 14th century, a place shrouded in dark allure. Local folklore whispers of a tragic love story that unfolded within this historical backdrop. A monk residing in the monastery reportedly fell deeply in love with a nun from a neighboring convent. Their love, forbidden and clandestine, blossomed in secret until their affair was tragically uncovered. The aftermath was grim. The monk faced a dire fate, being executed by hanging at the exact location where Borley Rectory would later stand. As for the nun, her punishment was equally harsh and more narrowing, as she was condemned to a living tomb, sealed alive within the convent walls. It is against the backdrop of love, betrayal, and tragedy that the spectral occurrences at Borley Rectory are believed to have originated, casting a long shadow over the property. These chilling tales and witnessed apparitions have catapulted Borley Rectory into the halls of paranormal history, marking it as one of the globe's most infamously haunted locations. Almost immediately after Henry Bull and his family made the estate their home. They found themselves engulfed in a barrage of mysterious occurrences. The onset was marked by inexplicable sounds, footsteps echoing in empty corridors, the persistent murmur of flowing water where there should be none, disembodied voices whispering in the dead of night, bells chiming independently despite severed connections, and objects that seemed to move of their own volition. However, these initial oddities quickly intensified in frequency. The children, particularly vulnerable and perceptive, reported the reoccurring vision of a sinister, ghostly nun wandering the premises. This eerie figure wasn't a fleeting glimpse. It manifested itself repeatedly, observed by multiple members of the Bull family. Among the children, the youngest daughter, Ethel, bore the brunt of the spectral harassment. She was subjected to physical assaults by an invisible assailant, enduring pushes, slaps, and with such force they left behind physical evidence of her encounters. Adding to the atmosphere of dread was the legend of a ghostly carriage pulled by horses and driven by two headless specters. These specters raced through the surrounding area with reckless abandon. This and other chilling encounters persisted, weaving a tapestry that seemed to grow more complex with time, enduring well past the death of Henry Bull in 1892, when he passed the property on to his son, Harry Bull. The legacy of unsettling phenomena thus continued. During Harry Bull's tenure, the eerie manifestations at the estate not only persisted, but seemed to intensify, with numerous bizarre occurrences recorded. On a particularly unsettling day, while Harry was tending to his garden, his dog suddenly erupted into a frenzy of barks, displaying a mix of terror and confusion, hiding behind a tree for reasons that weren't immediately apparent. Upon investigating the cause of his dog's distress, Harry reported a chilling sight: a headless figure emerging from behind the foliage, proceeding to board a phantom carriage that eerily glided into silence. This was not a solitary encounter. Harry experienced several such unnerving incidents with the ghostly carriage, which appeared to race by, only to dissolve into thin air moments later. Amidst these spectral happenings, the figure of the ghostly nun remained a constant. She was often observed in full daylight, roaming the grounds and unsettlingly peering through windows. On numerous occasions, Harry and his family's dining experiences were interrupted by the unwelcomed sight of her face, often gazing in through the window, an occurrence that became so frequent and disturbing that Harry eventually took measures to brick up the dining room window in an attempt to shield his family from her intrusive stares. These ongoing supernatural events under Harry's watch contributed to a thickening atmosphere of terror. Following Harry Bull's death in 1927, the rectory found itself draped in silence, temporarily forsaken until Reverend Guy Eric Smith and his wife decided to call it their home. No sooner had they unpacked their belongings than they found themselves plunged into a realm of unexplained phenomena. Phenomena that defied rational explanation. Their new abode seemed to pulsate with a life of its own, illuminated by wandering orbs of light that danced through the darkness, and haunted by the spectral vision of a nun whose presence was as persistent as it was unsettling. The ghostly carriage, with its headless drivers, continued its nocturnal journeys, accompanied by shadowy figures that flitted just beyond the corner of one's eye. The air was often pierced by the echo of footsteps and the mournful tolling of bells that rang from nowhere. The most chilling discovery, however, came at the hands of Smith's wife during an ordinary day of household chores. Hidden within the depths of an old cupboard, wrapped in a forgotten paper package, she stumbled upon a discovery that sent shivers down her spine. A human skull, its empty sockets seemingly staring back at her. This macabre find was soon accompanied by auditory disturbances. Hoarse whispers filled the air, and the sound of heavy footsteps resonated through the empty halls, creating an atmosphere thick with tension and unanswered questions. Reverend Smith found himself compelled to arm himself with a stick as he moved about his own home, a testament to the unsettling presence that seemed to stalk them from the shadows. Driven to the brink of insanity by these chilling experiences, the Smiths reached out to the Daily Mirror in 1929, desperate for answers. The newspaper responded by dispatching a man named Harry Price, a renowned paranormal researcher, along with his team. They were tasked with unraveling the secrets that lay hidden within the walls of the Borley Rectory, a mission that promised to delve deep into the unknown. Shortly after his arrival at Borley Rectory, Harry Price found himself quickly immersed in the intense paranormal activities that seemed to permeate out of nowhere. Throughout his investigation, Price documented witnessing several unexplainable events that defied logic. Objects were observed levitating and hurling through the air, propelled by something that they couldn't see, while cryptic messages eerily formed on mirrors, seemingly tapped out by ghostly fingers. In a particularly chilling incident, Price and his assistant watched in disbelief as a glass candlestick floated ominously before them, only to violently shatter against the wall, sending a cascade of glass fragments scattering in all directions. Moreover, Price reported encounters with the spectral figures that had become almost legendary at Borley Rectory. He claimed to have seen the haunting visage of the nun, headless coach drivers eerily navigating the night, and even the ghost of Henry Bull himself, looming within the shadow-filled corridors. They even purported to capture photographic evidence of an apparition, adding a tangible, albeit ghostly chapter to the rectory's storied history. However, it's worth noting that many of the extraordinary phenomena reported by Price was not corroborated by the experiences of the Smiths, leading to skepticism about the veracity of some events. Despite this, the Smiths had encountered enough unexplained disturbances to make the decision to leave the rectory in 1929, less than a year after they had made it their home. Price's detailed accounts of the bizarre occurrences at Borley Rectory were widely publicized, catapulting the story into the realm of public fascination and debate. This was the moment that the haunting at Borley Rectory transcended mere local folklore to become a captivating mystery that captured the imagination of the wider public, imbuing the rectory with a mystique that continues to intrigue and baffle to this day. Following Harry Price's investigation, which earned the property the title of the most haunted house in England, the residents welcomed its new occupants. In 1930, the incoming family comprised of Reverend Lionel Foister, a relative of the initial proprietor, Henry Bull, alongside his wife Mary Ann and their adopted daughter Adelaide. The transition into their new home was anything but ordinary, as it seemed that they also took possession of its lingering spectral residence, inheriting a legacy of encounters that would defy explanation once again. The Foisters were plunged into a realm of mysterious occurrences that seemed to intensify with time. Their daily lives were interrupted by an array of inexplicable events that would test the skepticism of even the staunchest doubter. Objects with minds of their own would be thrown through the air. Rocks, glasses, and bottles quickly became projectiles used by unseen forces. Windows shattered spontaneously as if struck by invisible stones, while doors developed wills of their own, locking and unlocking in a whimsical dance that left the family often stranded or intrusively barred from their own rooms. The household's furniture seemed to partake in a silent conspiracy, shifting positions when no one was watching, contributing to the discerning atmosphere that pervaded the estate. Objects would mysteriously vanish as well, only to reappear in the most unlikely places, as if the house itself was playing a macabre game of hide-and-seek with the living. Adding to the eerie ambiance were once again the inexplicable sounds of non-existent ringing bells, and these were accompanied by unsettling sounds of heavy breathing by no one that could be seen. Footsteps echoed in the halls, which again suggested the presence of unseen visitors that were treading the corridors alongside the living. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of the haunting was the apparent fixation of the malevolent presence on Mary Ann. This unseen force seemed to single her out for torment more than anyone else in the household. On numerous occasions, she experienced the sensation of being pushed, poked, and even slapped. Objects would be hurled directly at her, making her the unfortunate focus of these paranormal attacks. In one particularly harrowing incident, Mary Ann woke up in the dead of night, only to find herself struggling to breathe under the oppressive weight of a mattress, as if the entity was attempting to suffocate her in her own bed. Following this terrifying event, the walls of the rectory began to bear cryptic messages. Phrases like, "Mary Ann, please help," and "Mary Ann, light mass prayers," began appearing mysteriously. There were also moments when she was violently thrown from her bed or pinned down by the invisible oppressor. Experiences so disturbing that they convinced Foister to undertake exorcisms on 2 separate occasions. Unfortunately, though, these attempts would not only fail, but seem to anger the spirit even further, resulting in a frenzy of fist-sized stones being thrown at him. Adding yet another layer, Mary Ann reported sightings of the spectral figure of Bull, suggesting his lingering presence still was there within the confines of the rectory. Numerous paranormal investigators, captivated by the increasingly famous tale, hypothesized that the unsettling poltergeist manifestations might have been emanating from Marianne or perhaps their daughter. Pinning down the true source, however, remained an elusive task. As the Foysters vacated the property in 1935, Price seized the moment to re-enter the scene, eager to delve deeper into the mysteries that Borley Rectory seemed to jealously guard. Armed with the latest in ghost hunting technology and a keen sense of determination, Price embarked on an extensive recruitment drive, gathering a diverse group of 48 individuals. Together, they were to join him in his investigative quest, taking turns to stay overnight at the haunted premises, each one hoping to witness firsthand the peculiar occurrences that had captured the attention of the supernatural community. Price's ambition didn't stop there. He envisioned spending an entire year within the walls of the rectory to thoroughly document its myriad of mysteries. This wasn't just another ghost hunting expedition. It was a meticulously planned operation, aimed at peeling back the layers of secrecy that shrouded the house. With a mix of anticipation and a touch of the unknown, Price and his team prepared to embark on what promised to be an unprecedented exploration of the supernatural, a venture brimming with the potential to unlock the secrets of one of the most hauntingly captivating locations known. Throughout the duration of their year-long investigation at the property, the team reported a series of extraordinary findings, among which a particularly compelling seance conducted one evening stands out. In this session, the psychic medium, Helen Glanville, allegedly established communication with a spirit who introduced itself as Mary Larue. This spirit claimed a past life as a nun in France before making the life-altering decision to leave her convent, journey to England, and enter into marriage with a wealthy individual named Henry Waldegrave. Tragically, the tale took a dark turn, with Mary Larue recounting how she was brutally strangled by her husband and her body disgracefully abandoned in the cellar of the rectory. It was Mary's spirit, according to the narrative, that sought out Marianne, pleading for assistance from beyond the grave. In a subsequent chilling encounter, Glanville made contact with another spirit, this one identifying itself as Sune Emura. Displaying a more ominous intent, it issued a dire prophecy, declaring its plan to set the entire structure ablaze in 1938, with the aftermath revealing the remains of a murdered man amidst the ruins. In addition to these startling communications, the team encountered frequent poltergeist activities, areas of intense, unexplainable cold, bizarre non-human footprints in the snow, and purported sightings of the ghostly nun would become a figure of intrigue whilst delving into Borley Rectory's past. Taking on the role of chronicler, Price meticulously documented these investigations, their findings, and the haunting tales woven into the fabric of the rectory. The culmination of this exhaustive research was presented to the public in 2 volumes: The Most Haunted House in England, 1940, and The End of Borley Rectory in 1946. In what could only be described as a peculiar twist of fate, closely aligning with the ominous prediction made by the spirit they had contacted, the year 1939 unfolded with a startling incident. The Borley Rectory's new proprietor, Captain W.H. Gregson, accidentally dropped an oil lamp igniting a fierce blaze that swept through the structure. The resulting inferno severely damaged the manor, leaving it a charred shell of its former glory. In the aftermath, during an exploration in 1943, Price ventured into the remnants of the cellar, and amidst the debris, he discovered what he believed to be the remains of a young woman. This claim sparked controversy, with some skeptics questioning the human origin of these remains. Following the fire, an array of occurrences were reported in the vicinity of the now abandoned and fire-scarred rectory. Residents and visitors spoke of hearing inexplicable ghostly laughter echoing through the night, witnessing eerie lights with no discernible source, and encountering frequent malfunctions of electrical devices. Moreover, the spectral figure of the nun, who had become a haunting staple of the Borley lore, was sighted with unsettling regularity. Additional reports came from individuals, including World War II soldiers stationed nearby, who experienced the sensation of unseen assailants hurling stones at them. These mysterious events persisted until the rectory met its ultimate fate, being demolished in 1944. However, the demolition did not mark the end. Rather, it seemed to dilute the frequency and intensity of paranormal phenomena. As the years progressed, leading up to Harry Price's death in 1948, the tales of Borley Rectory's haunted legacy gradually receded into the shadows of history. The once vivid accounts of supernatural occurrences and ghostly sightings transitioned into whispered legends. This shift consigned Borley Rectory and its ghostly inhabitants to the realm of folklore, transforming it into a haunting echo of the past. In the years that followed since its peak of notoriety, the tale of the haunted Borley Rectory became embroiled in controversy, attracting a level of scrutiny that far exceeded expectations. Harry Price's foundational report, once a cornerstone of paranormal literature, found itself under the critical microscope of the Society for Psychical Research, or SPR, upon its release. This organization, steeped in investigations of the supernatural, raised doubts about the authenticity of the sightings reported by Price. They posed that a significant number of these incidents could be attributed to natural explanations, or could have been overly dramatized, or were outright fabrications crafted by Price himself. The skepticism surrounding Price's work intensified notably after his passing, when a Daily Mail journalist who had accompanied Price during his explorations at the rectory stepped forward with allegations that cast a shadow over the entirety of the findings. These allegations accused Price of concocting the entire narrative. And this claim was compounded by an even more startling revelation from Marianne Foister, a central figure in the Borley Rectory saga, would later confess that the haunting that they had experienced was a fabrication. The narrative took yet another twist with the publication of a book, 2000, by Louis Mayerling, boldly titled, "We Faked the Ghosts of Borley Rectory." Mayerling's work delves into the heart of the controversy, suggesting that the stories of the haunting that had captivated the public were the result of elaborate deceptions by the Bulls, the Foyers, Harry Price, and his investigative team. According to this account, these individuals were not the honest seekers of truth they claimed to be, but rather skilled illusionists and storytellers, weaving a complex web of ghostly tales that blurred the lines between reality and the supernatural. This perspective cast the Borley Rectory in a new light, suggesting that its legacy may be more about the human penchant for crafting narratives that captivate and intrigue, rather than tangible encounters in the supernatural realm. Despite the swirling vortex of skepticism, it's fascinating to observe that a substantial number of individuals still staunchly stand behind the authenticity of the Borley Rectory case. It strikes one as peculiar, almost beyond belief, that such a diverse group could mastermind an elaborate hoax spanning several decades with such precision. Numerous witnesses have passionately contended that the events witnessed could not have been the product of mere trickery, adding layers of intrigue to the narrative. This conviction among many has ensured that the eerie saga of Borley Rectory continues to captivate and bewitch minds, securing its place as a timeless, haunting narrative that ignites fervent discussions, debates, even to this day. But the question still looms large. What truly unfolded within those walls? Was there any substance to the tales? Or are we merely chasing shadows of a long-standing urban myth, meticulously woven by cunning fabricators? The truth is up to you to decide. With the principal characters and investigators of these mysterious events long past, and the rectory itself erased from the physical world, we find ourselves ensnared in a web of speculation. It appears that the tale of Borley Rectory is destined to hover in the realms of the unknown, a ghostly whisper from the past that continues to puzzle and mesmerize those who dare to delve into its depths. Thank you guys so much for watching this latest video. If you enjoyed it, please leave me a like, a comment down below with your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe with the bell on, and share this video around. All of those things help me out so much more than you know. I hope you're enjoying our historical hauntings recently. They're soon going to be accompanied by some really scary stories, so certainly get ready for that. As always, guys, thank you so much for supporting me. This has been Cody here at Mystery Archives. Remember to please stay safe out there, and take care. I'll see you next time.